Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our March public board meeting. For those who might be listening in today or later, I'm Caroline Flint, the Trust Chair, and we hope you're able to follow our proceedings and learn some information from it that's helpful to you. Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for absence. I haven't received any apologies for absence. I know Hilary is on her way to this meeting, Hilary Gledhill. Any other apologies for absence? Nope. No, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. If you'd like to just have a look at those, there have been some updates and changes. Any comments on the declaration of interest, anything else that needs to be added? And of course, any changes, please let Jenny know. Everybody happy with all of those updates? Brilliant, thank you very much. And we'll go on to the minutes. Are these an accurate record for approval, please? Yeah, thumbs up I am seeing. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll move on to the action log. Are there any matters arising from the action log or anything in the minutes that anyone would like to raise at this point? Just looking for any. Hang on a sec. Phil.
Yeah, just to say that the deep dive of triage came to March Quality Committee and that was very well received, and we got good reassurance. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phil, for sharing that. Anybody else? I can't see any hands up there. So, OK, we'll move on then to our staff story today. And it's an inclusion story about supporting staff with disabilities. And we've got John Duncan with us. And we've got also our chaplain, Eve, who I'll be seeing tomorrow at our Easter event. Welcome, Eve. Over to both of you. You're very welcome.
Hi, thank you. Morning, everyone. So Eve's discussion today is around her inclusion journey. It's really timely as the Trust have recently introduced new support and guidance around access to work arrangements. And these were developed collaboratively with our Disability Staff Network, Occupational Health, Estates and the Project Management team. But we also have in place a new Occupational Health team who are already reducing response time to access requests from 2 weeks down to just 24 hours, which is quite remarkable. The staff survey response to the question that asked if the organisation had made reasonable adjustments to enable them to carry out their work is just under 84%. This figure is significantly better than the comparison figure of 79%, and it's an improvement on our own figure of 2022, which was just under 80%. But similarly this year, we're trying to be more proactive with our workforce disability equality standard reporting. This year, we're taking the raw data to the Disability Staff Network on the 3rd of April, so we can get an early start on collaborating on the analysis and action planning to really co-produce the report with our stakeholders and really drive disability inclusion forward at some pace. But this will ensure that the drivers of change are the actual experiences of our staff. But the board can be assured that we're seeing a real positive impact for our colleagues with a disability or long-term condition, and that will ensure that they're not disadvantaged while working at the Trust. Anyway, enough of me. That leads me very nicely on to hand over to Eve Rose, our Trust chaplain, to talk to you about her own inclusion journey at the Trust. Over to you, Eve.
Thank you, John. 25 years ago, a mother went to a consultation with a small daughter to a top Leeds hospital. After a series of tests, this top consultant gave the mother the news that her daughter had Asperger's and semantic pragmatic disorder, which the consultant informs her was almost certainly the mother's fault, as the mother had dyslexia, dyspraxia, and autism also. He said, oh, there's nothing can be done. He said the daughter, who was under 5 at the time, should be written off. He said she'd never be a nurse because people with autism can never show compassion. They would never, ever make a committed relationship or be a real useful member of society. But never mind, you can join a support group. Well, the mother wasn't best pleased and angrily left the room, never to return. Fast forward 5 years onwards, that same mother, nearly 20 years ago, goes to an interview at Beverley Westwood. It's an all-day interview to be a hospital chaplain. There was a PowerPoint presentation involved. That PowerPoint presentation was absolutely beyond the capacity of the interviewee. The interviewee was unable to do it, but brought verbal and pictures and different ways of showing the same thing of the PowerPoint presentation. Bearing in mind the context of that bringing endorsement of autism from the consultant from the Leeds Hospital, the interviewee was very surprised to get the post. Obviously, you know, and you can guess that the interviewee was myself. I got the job despite not being able to drive. And just, you know, this is a patch the size of Belgium. It is because very, very difficult. I have dyspraxia. I have no concept of right or left or roundabouts or coordination. I'm quite disordered in my thinking, so I have to use lots of journals and different ways of going about things. I'm reading and writing and all sorts of arithmetic is almost beyond me. So not only did they give me the job against the prevailing thoughts of the time, they started to work straight away to find new ways of supporting me to be the best chaplain I could be. So that meant I had the first real assessment through occupational health, and I was sent to one of the proper assessment folk for the first time in my life. I'd been through different NHSs and I worked at that time for Leeds Trust. I worked for the church and I'd been through their selection process. And when it came to, this is quite funny, I will tell you this, when it came to that everyone else was doing a degree on the training course, and because I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic and all the rest of it, they decided that I wouldn't be able to do all the ancient Latin and the ancient Greek. So they sent me out to do community work instead. Win-win. It was brilliant. And I trained to be a counsellor during that time. And it was absolutely brilliant. I used to go past the rooms with all them doing the stuffy, boring Latin and stuff. And off I sailed out into the community in Birmingham. So that was one of the funny things. But the sad thing is that nobody had assessed me to this point to see what my needs would be. And Humber did from the very get-go, which was incredible. I was found to be in the highest 2% in the country around my disability. And I quickly got an access to work interview and they made a lot of recommendations. Right again from the start. And I went through higher education, the church and other NHS organisations, and nobody had done that assessment. I found I couldn't and still can't work Dragon software, which is a voice recognition software, which is really good for a lot of dyslexic and dyspraxic and autistic people, because my reading is too slow for the voice recognition to catch up with my voice. So there are things, and still I cannot use a computer. I cannot work and see a keyboard in the way that other people see, but I use an iPad and I've learned to configure it, and I've bought it, and it's a massive one, and I've used it. So I've gone through these 20 years with lots of adjustments and it's been very difficult in lots of ways, because chaplaincy has been managed by a variety of great and wonderful people and strange people and strange departments, from estates to HR and come back to patient experience, where I now am. I got at the beginning 2 full days of admin support, but not even the chief exec would get that now. It's like, and we know it's completely unfeasible. So how would I still manage to function in the absence of lots of financial difficulties with every NHS organisation? But I must say, despite all this, I am doing better than I have ever done. I'm thriving more and getting more support than I have ever done in my life. That is partly, and it can never be underestimated, the power of a personal manager that really gets you and really cares about disabilities and really actually takes the time and the patience, even though they're incredibly busy, to do that. For instance, the staff survey, I've never been able to fill it in. I've never been able to fill it in online. When it's been a paper, which was years ago, it was fine. But online, it's been impossible. I could not do it. But my boss liaised with HR to get phone access. And that's it for years and years. I've been doing that since it was. So now feel more part of this trust, and I'm able to have a say. And this is really important. All that you really want is to be able to do your job and be like anybody else. Then my boss said that she felt that with extra support, that I might be able to fill it in online myself. So Beth, who is an admin support for the patient experience team, set up the access link. I worked how to do it, and this year I managed to do it myself for my online, and this is absolutely incredible. The biggest challenge I ever faced with my disability was, of course, during the pandemic, and that was to access and deliver online services. After it became apparent to me when I saw and I'm working with patients who either had relatives or were dying themselves in different parts of the trust throughout Indian community. And one of them heartbreakingly said to me the most important thing that they wanted was to have a puka pie and to go and see Hull City and with their brother. And of course their brother could not be there, and neither could they see Hull City. So I wanted to develop a way, and my boss wanted me also to develop a way of doing these services online, but I couldn't do it. I can't go, I couldn't work teams, I couldn't do it. I just had no way of getting. So this took literally, I wasn't living at home at the time, I was living in the hotel so that I could be on with my patients. I sat hours and with my boss online, because we couldn't be together, teaching me how to access it. Then I went talked to my friend who is also, he's neurodivergent as well, but he's very technical. So he sent me pictures of how to do it. And eventually I managed to do it. And not only did it, I invited Hull City along to come and be part of it. And just me and my boss did this. and we were inviting them, and there was the mayor, Lord Mayor of Hull, and we got people together all over the city to the services. And the first one was in Easter, bearing in mind that was March, April time then, and the pandemic had only just started. We got involved very quickly about disseminating and making sure people were connected. But for someone like myself, this is unbelievable. But it took patience. It took hours of people's time and patience on the ward who were dying or sick and lonely and frightened. Staff were able to see each other and see families who had been bereaved were able to come online. And and perhaps my favourite honour of all things is that with the Trust we kicked off the Freedom Festival. From when we were allowed 2 people together, I got permission to go into Guildhall with the Lord Mayor, and we kicked off the Freedom Festival from online. And I got this, which I don't know if you can see. It's a little Lord Mayor's Award. It's got like I got from the Lord Mayor for the services during COVID. And I've done a lot of things in my life. I'm one of the first women to be ordained, and that was pretty horrific what had gone against women priests at that time. And I've got a lot of things that I'm proud of, but this I'm probably proud of all of them apart from my children, because this is flying in the face of enormous disability and is a testament to the Trust's support. Finally, I'm finishing, you'll be glad to hear, with one of my favourite little stories. I have that extra day off that staff get for the first time ever in my life, and I'm super smug. You get that extra day off if you've had your COVID and flu jabs. Of course I had that, but it's with your mandatory trainings done in time. I never got that done in time, because it would rely on me sitting with somebody in training when they had availability and going through over a day of sitting with me. Nobody had that time to do it, but my boss wasn't going to write me off and not write off as well her statistics, and rightly so. So what she did with the head of training, they developed a dashboard and worked with me, and I did and got all of my training done, and I was the first person in the department to do it, and I've got that extra day. It's not the extra day so much, because I struggle to use my annual leave anyway. It's about being like everyone else and part and parcel of this incredible organisation. So I'm going to finish to say, as for my daughter, she heads up the Northern Ireland section of Payment Sense. It's a top Hull company that provides car machines and supports to the business world. She gets married in Hessel Church in September to a lovely man called Aaron, who's the son of one of our Trust's HR managers. So there you go. And thank you, Humber, for enabling me to thrive, not just survive.
Just turn my mic back on there. I was just so intensely listening to what you had to say there, Eve. Thank you very much. Already in the chat box, there's been some really lovely comments around, you are always really so positive, Eve, and it just sort of beams out of you always. But thank you so much for sharing that, and also sharing some of your daughters, what the results have been for your daughter as well. And I honestly, I think actually, considering that just, it's very recently that we had a sort of neurodiversity celebration week, I think it's been great to have you here today to share your experience as well, both the challenges, but also how we've been in very practical ways and supportive ways able to support you. And you know, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the farm for the Easter service. So thank you so much, Eve. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Eve, that was inspirational. I just can't say anything more. You forgot to mention, of course, that you've been the mayor of Rotherham, which everyone knows is the capital of South Yorkshire. It's just not been recognised yet. Before this meeting, I'd asked for some minor adjustments to deal with my site problems, and the response was fantastic. Straight away, people were saying you could do this and you can do that, and it just shows the can-do attitude of the trust. I've now had 2 illnesses that the trust have supported me with, and the culture that Michelle and the chair and others have established has just been absolutely wonderful. Nothing is too much trouble. Someone is going to get in touch with me after the meeting to help me fill a form in. And I think you may have found it, if you're the same as me, that sometimes it's the little things that matter, that someone just offers to do a form for you and you think, oh my goodness, that's a burden lifted off my shoulders. So thank you for the presentation, Eve, and I shall go away tonight and consider, as I always do, how lucky I am, and I shall say a prayer for you as well.
Eve, you're on mute.
I just wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome. Lynn, and then I've got Stuart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Eve, thank you so much for sharing your story. I thought I knew you, but there were aspects to what you've shared with us today that I didn't know. So thank you very much for that. Eve, I still speak to staff who are neurodivergent, who are still reluctant to sort of come forward and ask for support, Eve. Now, obviously, I do all that I can to persuade those staff that, you know, we really want them to come forward and take advantage of the support that is there. But there still is a reluctance and nervousness around doing that from some people I speak to. Eve, what do you think we could do more in order to, you know, encourage those staff to come forward? Because, you know, they're brilliant employees for the reasons that you've described today, and they bring an enormous amount to us, you know, in our organisations. So I still think it's something that we need to focus on, and probably John will talk a bit about that perhaps as well. But what, from your perspective, do you think that we can do to really embrace and include those staff and, you know, encourage them to feel that they can be honest with us about those needs?
Well, it's the same process as well that we've gone through around mental health. It's about destigmatizing it, and it is a big stigma, and it's about normalizing it. It's about telling people the story and about of people, when you come out, if you like, and say, oh, this is my reality, they say, oh, well, I've got this, maybe I feel like this, and maybe I struggle with this. It's about patience, and I know, Lynn, that you do have that, but people fear, and they do fear it, and even I fear. I was more frightened about talking about this. I also have mental health issues due to PTSD. I'm a child sexual exploitation survivor, and I can talk about that, to be honest, a lot easier than I can talk about this, because this, you still feel, because we're not got that far on in society, and I that's why I put that beginning, to show what society was saying, even the consultants that worked in that field, and how different the trust has been and always will be. But the problem is, in society, you still feel like, and I was still thinking, oh, I wonder if they know this. They might think, oh, I might not get, and, you know, I might need to go for my job. I wonder if I present this to the board. This comes into your head because of the stigma of and things like the neurodivergent week, and talking about it a bit more. And I'm more than happy to come along and meet with any groups of staff, or to come along and to staff groups and different things that you could, because you can, like I said, thrive. And I'm doing better than I've ever done. And you've got to throw menopause into the mix, and I've got brain fog a go-go. Yeah. So all of this, and I'm doing better. So.
Great.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Eve.
Stuart and then Michelle.
Oh, hi, Eve. I'm Stuart McKinnon-Evans here. Nice to see you there. I feel like I'm having partly a history lesson in overcoming disability, which is very, very interesting. But I'm also curious, I'm also curious about what feels like your ambivalent relationship with technology. So I can see that technology can be a great support and enabler for some. So my question is one about imagining something. If you could imagine a piece of technology to help you even further, what would it be?
It would be like an iPad, which without a keyboard that you could speak to and that would fill in. And because I still have to do everything like this.
Yes.
And I'd also would set up, because I can't fill in reminders on diaries. So that would be amazing. That would be phenomenal, that I had some calendar that worked and would tell me. And because of the disordered way that I do things.
Yes.
I have to constantly, and sometimes I get up at 4 o'clock to make sure that I know what I've got to do.
That's really interesting. And second question, even despite your initial thoughts, will you ever consider learning Latin?
Never.
Thank you. You're very clear about that.
Hell no.
Carpe diem. Carpe diem. Michelle.
Thanks, Eve. My question wasn't about learning Latin, but thank you for a fantastic presentation. And a bit like Lynn, really, I did think I knew you very well, but the adversity that you've overcome has been remarkable, and you do a fantastic job. And I was going to ask a similar question to Lynn about if there's anything else that we can do, but just to say, really, I think you don't appreciate just how much you make a difference to the organisation across multi-faiths, to be honest, Steve, as well. I think that's important to say. But I want to take you up a bit on what you mentioned about speaking a bit more around the organisation, because it's something that I feel really strongly about, is that physical disability. I feel so strongly about all aspects of equality, and I thank John for helping us bring this story today. But I just wondered how we could maybe get some of the conversation that we've had today to the wider staff population, to be honest. I think it'd be really helpful for them to hear some of that. So if I could leave that with you and maybe John and Karen, just to sort of say, how can we, because I think the more that we have that lived experience, we do a lot of co-production. Our policies now are becoming more and more co-produced, which is fantastic. But the more that we can share that lived experience within the organisation, wider within the organisation, the better. So I'd like to maybe think and take you up on that if we could. So I'll leave that with yourself and John particularly, but maybe Karen can oversee it as well. Is that maybe feedback at the board at some point, how that's going, or certainly to the exec team? But thank you, great story, great way to start the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And before I just say thanks to Eve, I mean, Priyanka's put something in the chat box that I think is really interesting as well. Is my Google tells me every morning what I have lined up for the day. As soon as my alarm goes in the morning, you can speak to it and set up reminders and tasks. I mean, I think with technology, probably we don't know a fraction of the possible really helpful applications you can use. And maybe that's something for the trust to look at, which is, how, you're left to your own devices. You get a new phone, you're not quite sure, and just left to your own devices on these things. Maybe there's something on the technology side that can be looked into how people can get the best out of some of these things. MST Teams is another example, I think. But I mean, there's clearly things that can be done, and thanks to that, Priyanka. Suggestions have come in that maybe we could have a video if Eve is up for it. In terms of maybe sharing some of the story, and also at the annual members meeting where we could share some stories, actually, not just Eve's, but maybe there's other staff as well, would be really great as well to showcase some of those maybe at the annual members meeting. All really great great suggestions here, and there's others in the chat box as well. So if that can be sort of, if Karen or John could look at those chat box messages and tips and thoughts and share them with Eve as well for taking this forward, that would be great. Eve, John, thank you so much for today. It's been, as people have said, really inspirational, and you do it with such good humour as well, Eve. It's so lovely. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much, Eve.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, John. Bye, Eve. Okay, great. That's great. So moving on to my report. You've got the report. It's all there. I just want to just mention a couple of things. Thanks to everybody on the board who took part in our first Ask the Board the other day. For anyone listening in, we have an Ask the Executive where staff can sort of send questions in or join us on an online call to ask any questions they want. And we had a first of our Ask the Board sessions, which I think was great. I think we had over 50 people actually click in for that, which is a good start. And it was a really good way, I think, as a sort of just an introduction for, particularly for the non-executive directors and the associate non-executive directors, to introduce themselves. So obviously that's available, I think, for people to click on and stream it and see what was said there. But thanks for everybody's participation in that. I just wanted to flag, and I know it's in the Chief Exec's report, just to sort of obviously just mention about Dr. Wendy Mitchell, who died in February. And as everyone will know, she's been a huge champion for our trust, but particularly a trust research champion. And I know Catherine Hart and her team have worked so closely with Wendy over the years. And obviously we're very sorry to hear that she had died. But there's many other people, lots of other people in the trust who've actually worked with Wendy as well. And I've seen some excellent videos that she's done with others around dementia and coping with that. And so I just wanted to say something at the board to say we express our sympathy for Wendy's family and friends and those who are friends in the trust, but also just to sort of just say what an amazing, another amazing, inspirational woman who did so much for our trust, but also nationally as well. Just also to flag, we've got the National Staff Survey coming up later, and Karen's reporting on that. But it has been great to hear that the Health Service Journal have officially announced that Humber is the top performing trust for recommended as a place to work, with an improvement of 18.2% since 2019. And I just wanted to flag that it's in my report and make sure that's on the record for today. It was great also to take part in International Women's Day events. Gemma Cartman and myself did a little session on coaching and mentoring. It was a really great turnout actually, and I think also what came out of it with all our discussions was just how we've got some amazing women in our organisation. They're incredibly successful. They've all got really interesting journeys of their own progress. But honestly, I think we had a really good conversation about sometimes as women we still don't think we're good enough. We still don't think we're good enough, and we're always questioning ourselves. And I think out of that, and Karen was in on the conversation as well, was just actually this is a work in progress. I admit that for myself as well, about how we have to sort of make, through coaching and mentoring, continue to make sure people feel, really strong esteem for what they've achieved, but also about putting themselves forward for more challenges and more progress in the years ahead. As I mentioned earlier, I met up with the Humber Adult Autism Diagnostic Service during Neurodiversity Celebration Week, and it was really good. I mean, I was the only non-clinician on the call, so I had to ask for a bit of explanation of everything, but it was really interesting, and there was such a good buy-in from staff at this event. I know there were a series of events held during that week, but there were so many staff who called in to ask about how they could use the service, when they're dealing with different parts of their work, how they could access it, and that was really great. And the team were brilliant in their responses. And just following on from what Eve said, in my working life, I actually did some work with our intelligence services as a member of Parliament, and GCHQ, as I've mentioned in my report, have long been a pioneer when it's come to actually employment of people who are neurodivergent. I mean, going way back, and they have some amazing ideas and facilities there to support their neurodiverse staff. And they have their strapline is daring to think differently and be different. So maybe there's something that we can get someone from GCHQ to do something for next year's celebration week to talk about how they've been doing it as well, and they can learn from us too. Just a couple of more things I just wanted to flag as well. On the visits, I put in my report the visits that I have managed to do between board meetings, and I also put in my report the visits for NEDs and governors, and there's one in on my report this month. Now I know there's some other visibility visits in the chief exec's report, but a number of the visits that NEDs have wanted to do and governors have had to be cancelled because of staff illness, and I just want to flag that because it's not because non-executive directors are not putting themselves forward the visits, but they are being cancelled at the last minute. And I think that plays into later on the agenda when we look at some of the issues around performance and staff illness. So I think there may be something there to connect about the visibility piece and visits and what's happening that we just maybe need to think about to ensure that we can, as much as possible, make sure that visits are happening. I wouldn't want the few visits of NEDs on my report to reflect a lack of interest. It certainly isn't, but that's maybe something we need to think about in the round in relation to visibility visits more generally. So okay, apart from that, that's my report. I just wanted to flag some of those issues, and we had a great thank you everybody from the board as well who took part in the Governor Development Day we had the other week with governors. It was really a great, very inclusive, very engaging event for us to get to know each other better, but also to get to know governors and them get to know us. And I am in discussion with colleagues, Marilyn Foster, our lead governor, but also Stella, about putting it forward as a good practice for the Governor Focus conference in July that's being run by NHS providers. That's all from me. Any questions? Nope. Okay, we'll move on to the Chief Exec's report then. And we have got a couple of policies to ratify today as well. Michelle.
Thanks, Chair. A lot of interesting and great stuff in your report. Thank you. Which actually will follow on hopefully nicely, because obviously there's some cross references there, and it was good to celebrate International Women's Day. It was also good to celebrate. There was a great which I haven't read the report because it was just on Friday, an LGBT plus event that was really supported, and we've done a lot of work getting the feedback on that. So we will act on that feedback in relationship to looking at policies and procedures through the relevant networks that we've got. It's good to see in the reports the visibility piece, as you mentioned, visibility and visits, Caroline. It's also good just to get a bit of a snapshot at the board, I think, from the directors' visibility visits, because you can see the breadth of visits that people have been doing. So I think that's really helpful to see. So I'm hoping others around the board agree with that. I'm possibly thinking about the Veterans Forum, because we often chat a bit about the Veterans Forum, but we are doing a lot of work with that particular forum. So I thought it was useful just to have a little bit about the recent work that Mandy and the team have been doing in relationship to those face-to-face meetings. So I'll just draw people's attention to that. Great to see continually. I know we've got pressures, we've got challenges, and we've got issues that we need to deal with, but it's continually great to see awards coming in relationship to shortlists. We've got a couple for the HSJ Digital Awards and others, so they're in the reports. It's great to see that. It's a great reflection of how hard our staff are working in such challenging situations, and I'm sure you would support that. It's also great that we've got the Royal College President visiting us as well, so that we can showcase our services and also get some feedback from the national perspective on what their thoughts are in relationship to the professions and the services, and maybe have some conversations about industrial action going forward. to continue our co-produced and interwoven work with our voluntary and other statutory and non-statutory sector. I had a great visit to the Tigers Trust. I've had a few visits, but this was an accumulation really. And it was really great to see, because we have put a couple of small contracts with them, and it's really great to see that work in action, and just to see the breadth of work that they do with the really socially deprived areas within our communities, particularly in Hull, but it's actually wider as well. And we are looking to see if we get, for example, some boot banks across the organisation where people can donate their football boots and rugby boots, and they'll go into their boot store, etc. So that was really helpful to see. I've put a little bit about HIMSS, the change in certain things. We've got a new dean now in Matt Morgan, has been there a couple of months. But they're beginning to change a little bit of the way that they're doing things, and I've had some good conversations with Matt about the school going forward. So we will watch this, and I'll update the board as we get some more information. There's quite a bit on Health Stars, because as you know, that's coming into the organisation from the 1st of April. So we have got some transitional plans, and we've just started to have a lot of conversation about that at the executive team. So that will follow through. And there's a lot, as usual, in the communication sector. There's been a lot of work, as always, from the communication. So I won't pick anything out. I'll let the teams do that. You've mentioned a lot about the staff survey. It is on the agenda, so I'll leave Karen to talk us through that. But also, Karen maybe just wants to pick up the miscarriage work and our annual leave plus, because we were cited, and NHS England now are actually taking our policy and rolling that out across NHS England, which is fantastic news. So I'm going to pause in a second and ask Karen to maybe explain that a little bit more. And yes, very sad news about Wendy. I'm sure we'll recognise Wendy at the Up and Coming Research Conference, but I am in conversation to say if there's something we can do in relationship to an award at the Staff Awards, and we'll see if we can get the family involved in that. So we're just developing potential options on that, because Wendy was a real ambassador for the organisation, and it was exceptionally sad news to hear of that, hear of a passing. Hopefully there's lots of things in the report people want to have a chat about. I will leave directors to talk about their own section. I'll pause there, but if I can, I'll just hand over to Karen, maybe just give us a little bit more of an update on the Leave Plus chair, and then I'll throw it open to my director colleagues to pick up anything that they wish to do so at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. So yes, NHS England recently launched their enhanced leave and pay in support of staff and their partners in the event of baby loss or early pregnancy loss. And as such, we were actually cited in the national news, particularly in the BBC news, because we actually launched that this time last year. It was about March time last year, where we obviously launched Your Leave Plus. And not only did we put a lens on supporting people in those scenarios, but a number of other scenarios that we provide support with, such as child bereavement leave, terminal illness care. So there are a number of things that we did that was really leading the way at the time, and NHS England and a couple of other trusts did sort of launch at the same time. So we were approached actually by BBC Radio Humberside, so we have actually engaged with them just again as a really good opportunity to shine a lens on it and promote the trust. So a really good opportunity to share how far we've come in our journey. And I'll also be attending a national webinar in April as a panel member to talk about our journey and how we support our staff, particularly around their journey into parenthood. So that's really exciting. And like I say, it's really put a lens on the trust around that and the supportive nature of some of our policies, which is great.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. Just before we go on, can I just pick up Priyanka's point in relationship to the standby piece? It's really difficult, Priyanka, to get staff on standby because of the way that they're working in the units, particularly wherever possible. We will get the visits to go ahead, but sometimes especially if you look at the Safer Staffing report, it depends on the acuity on those particular areas, but also the staff we have available as well. So we don't cancel the visits lightly. But thank you for the comment. We'll take that into the exec team, but it's not something that we just say, well, we've got a member of staff off, so that's not happening. It depends on the appropriate nature of the staff, how we've got on, and what level of acuity we've got from the patient point of view. But it's a good point, and we'll have another conversation about that.
Perhaps, Michelle, because we can just verify that it's actually not just a case that the person who was the contact person is away and therefore another member of staff could pick it up, which seems to me completely rational. But if it is a real staffing level issue, and I don't think that's sometimes clear.
Yeah, I think
It's-
it's a way we communicate it. So that's why I said we'll take it back and we'll make sure that we communicate the reasons why in full as well, as much as we can do. Thank you. Don't know if any of the director wants to come in about any of the.
Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments around the MAPPA section under the Chief Operating Officer piece. So our MAPPA work, multi-agency public protection work, continues to progress. Overall, we're really pleased with the progress that we've made, but the report does make mention that our lead across Holland East Riding for the probation and the strategic work around MAPPA is leaving. Kate Munson, she's retiring at the end of April, and she has made a significant contribution herself. In fact, she and I met a couple of weeks ago just to reflect, and we both came into post around the same time, actually. So I really reflected on the joint and partnership work and the strength of that partnership over the last few years. At the same while, our trust lead, our lead psychologist, Kate York, is also leaving as well. So just want to give some assurance to the board, really, that there is already a replacement in post for Kate Munson. I've met her already, we're working alongside her, and we've also got a replacement for Kate in Helen Courtney, our clinical lead for our forensic service. But it was just really, hopefully on behalf of the board, perhaps to thank Kate York and Kate Munson for their work over the years as well. It's a really important area of work, quite complicated at times, but again, really positive in terms of where we've reached over recent years. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And yeah, I'd just like to say personally, I've met Kate and York on a number of occasions, and just wish her well. And I'm really glad we've got a replacement in, I think, is it Helen Courtney, isn't it? Yes, who's replacing her. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Lynn, on that area on MAPPA, you may be aware that I have taken quite an interest in MAPPA. So if there's anything in terms of continuity in particular that I can do from a non-exec lesson viewpoint while I'm still here, I would like to. And the other thing is, in your area, Lynn, and in Chief Exec's report, you've revised the EPRR policy. There's no longer a central requirement for a non-exec to be involved in that, but I do want to remain involved. So if there's a paper anywhere that says it's changed and this is how it's changed, I'd be very interested in that. Thank you.
Thank
Can I
you.
just come back on that?
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, Mike, yes, thank you. I know you have a huge knowledge of MAPPA as well, and believe you me, will continue to make advantage of that. So thank you for that. Just on the EPRR policy, actually, the changes to it were reasonably minor, and the focus was specifically to add some sections around our requirements around particularly subcontracts we have, and ensuring that they also demonstrate that they meet the requirements within our overall emergency planning approaches. That was the essence of that. Otherwise, the policy, as far as the trust is concerned, didn't really change, Mike, just to be clear.
That's fine, and we can leave it at that, Lynn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Francis.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions and then a couple of things I want to flag for later discussion. The first one, and it's great that Michelle brought it out on the Trust's Veterans Forum, because there's been a lot of press recently. I've seen quite a lot on TV and in the newspaper about issues with veterans and mental health. So it was just really good to see that's being raised, and maybe we can have a more in-depth discussion about that at a later stage. The next thing that I was going to pick up on was on pack page 44, which was the really good work that Karen and the team seem to be doing around the Proud alumni proposals. And again, whether we hear more about it now or at a later date, I'd like to hear more about that, and whether or not we can attend or observe the leadership conference. So before I go on to something else, I just wondered if Karen wanted to pick that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Francis. So we've been on a bit of a journey with this, and obviously we know that the Proud programme was officially launched in 2018, but back in the summer, around August time, we did a full review of the Proud programme and looked at what was next. And for us, I think the gap was we had quite an extensive leadership development programme, but what we didn't have was the next steps there. How do we continue with those relationships that have formed? How do we enable those individuals to continue to come together and share ideas and support one another in their development? So what we looked at was a few ways in which we could bring individuals together as part of this alumni. So work's been going on in the background, and we are just launching that now. So we're looking at kind of network meetings, big conversations and things as a mean to kind of cement some of that learning and actually put on the sort of horizon and the platform some of these new and emerging leadership themes as well. So we're fully utilising MS Teams channels and things like that to really bring our leaders together. And in terms of the leadership conference, that was really an extension of that and a really good opportunity to bring our leaders together once a year to be able to, again, bring some speakers in, have some really good topics of conversation that are on the, that are raised and able to get that debate. So we would absolutely welcome attendance from members of our board. Absolutely. I'm fully supportive of that.
Thanks, Karen. One more question, then a couple of points. The other question was on page 43, which was the Humber Primary Care. So great that we've now got in the triage system, total triage. But again, picking up on something that we've heard today, how does that then sort out people who can only use the phone? Because we've talked today about people who can't use tech, and there's quite a lot of older people who can't use tech. So if we put total triage in to move to an online-based platform, what does that do for people who can't use online? Don't know who wants to pick that up.
Barmy?
Yeah, and I think thanks for that. The system does pick up on that. What is done is that you look for all the patients who cannot use technology, and then you put almost like an asterisk on their record so that when you want to triage, you use a telephone or you use a paper triaging. So that there's a system inbuilt to make sure that you pick those few people who cannot use technology in inaccuracy and things like that. I'm sure Philip is aware of such ways of capturing those who are what we call difficult to use technology group of people.
Is that a bit difficult though, Kwame, it requires you knowing that person needs that rather than, them sort of knowing that that's aware, if you see what I mean. It's a bit sort of like, it's, making sure we know that to add people on rather than people being able to do it themselves, I suppose. Maybe Phil, did you want to come in on this?
Yes, sure. I'm not sure that this is the right way forward. I was talking to my old practice manager yesterday, and they've done it, and it's deeply unpopular with the patients to a degree that the list sizes start to go down, which I'd never known ever in my whole career. So we just need to think of all the things that frustrate us when we're contacting organisations and make sure that our practices don't have them embedded in them, whilst trying to encourage people to the most efficient way for the organisation. We need to be very mindful what it's like to use it, and it needs to be usable and accessible by everyone. And it's really it's the key, access, and then providing appointments. That is what general practice at its core is all about.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I'm just seeing, let me just have a look in the chat box here. So yeah, Hilary says practical use of volunteers in reception to help people through the process. That's all good, but I suppose it's before you get to the reception for people that's how they get in touch in the first place. This is raising lots of people are putting their hands up. I don't know if it's on the same thing, but that says to me that maybe another discussion needs to maybe take place to reassure people about this triaging process, and might be something for Phil, you to take up on the quality, but it sounds to me that lots of hands are going up about this, and Francis, you flagged it Francis, coming back to you, anything you want to say, having listened to that conversation?
That's really helpful, and I'm with Philip. You know, I've experienced recently with my father and other things, people who are really struggling to access and get in. So it's trying to find that balance that's right for everybody, so that everybody has an equal ability to get in. And the most frustrating bit is actually getting in to get an appointment in the first place. Never mind if it's then done on another system.
Yeah,
I've got two other things I could pass it over. So my other two things, which are to bring up later on the operational plan, was I'm just flagging now that I'm going to bring up under the operational plan, because I'm going to link a few things together from today's agenda, the delayed transfers of care, which is on page 38, and the government review into mental health services and local government and issues with budgets and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to bring that in later on. I'm just flagging that now because I want to link some things together.
Yeah, thanks. And we've had a chat about that as well, Francis, and thanks for that advance notification too. Okay, right, going back to the list of people here, I've got Stuart next, then I've got David, and I've got Lynn.
Thanks very much. Sorry for dotting around the agenda a little bit. Question for Lynn, and then one for Pete, please. Lynn, on the emergency planning, our preparedness and response, when did we last do a dry run exercise of any kind?
Lynn?
Yes, so we plan those in 12 months in advance, Stuart. So we've participated in quite a few over the last 12 months. Okay. Some of those are organised through our local resilience forum.
Yeah.
And they take a number of guises. Some are tabletop exercises. There are various types of those. And we also run an annual exercise that's a trust-led one every year as well as part of the requirements. And obviously the learning and outcomes from those, they're debriefed as you would expect and obviously shared. So we have the benefit of sharing from sort of regional, local and trust-wide planning exercises.
Thank you. And then Pete, I just wanted to bring out on the estate, the work being done on estates. I can see there's a nice rolling list of maintenance and investment going on. The Salix work being undertaken at Alfred and Hornsey Hospital, I presume has got some sustainability gains on it. So my question is, are we continuing to bid for Salix funds for more of the same?
We continue to bid when it becomes available, Stuart, which is often limited, but also in the capital programme 24-25, we have set aside some trust resource to address green plan initiatives.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Moving on to David, who's also put something in the chat box. David.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the Humber Primary Care CQC inspection. I think this might be for Lynn, maybe Kwame. Just for clarity, really, the regulatory breach where we are not kind of ensuring that care and treatment is safe, is that related to the access issue or is that something else?
Lynn, you're nodding your head there. Do you want to?
Yes, it's related wholly to access, David, and the same issues that we've discussed in relation to the other practices as well. And the resolution, at least in part to that, is the rollout of the new telephone system as well, which should be complete by the end of April. There have been some delays in that. They're not of our making. They're with the contractor that's putting the telephone system in. So, and obviously along with the other work, and I appreciate the points that have been made around the triage, but I just wanted to reiterate that patients can still call to make an appointment irrespective. And through our patient engagement work, we've got a dedicated patient engagement lead for primary care. We are really focused, we were anyway, around all aspects of access, and that digital piece is part of that work as well. So we are really working hard to make sure that these methods aren't impacting on people's ability, given the focus that we've got on access to these practices anyway, through all of that work. So we're doing that through the digital technologies, but we are doing a patient experience piece. I think it's really quite rigorous with that dedicated lead to really understand that sort of inclusion access agenda around these services. And we'll continue to work on that through the plans that we've got in place anyway, and obviously that CQC requirement as well. So we've got a really robust approach, in my view. We're happy to talk about it elsewhere, but given the focus, I'm satisfied we're doing everything that we can around that agenda. But just wanted to really reiterate, patients can still telephone and get access to appointments.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn. I think as in the chat box as well, David said, obviously not all, when we talk about technology, not all packages are equal. Some are not as helpful as others. And I think it's about the reassurance that the ones that we choose, they have been stress tests to make sure that we're not buying something that fundamentally is, or in any way, going to be a problem later on when it actually gets starting to be used by members of the public. I do know from my discussion with David Napier, who leads our complaints, that actually I think Market Wheaton and our practice in Cottingham, actually the number of complaints have been going down because they've been doing a lot of work. Humber Primary is still an issue for all the reasons that we've discussed today. But that is showing up in the complaints coming through, and clearly it's something that needs to be addressed. And as you've outlined today, it is being addressed. So we want to hear more on that, no doubt. Michelle and then Mike.
Yes, I mean, I was just going to reiterate quite a lot of what's already been said, but I think it's helpful for the board to know and to suggest that the quality committee maybe just look at what we are doing in relationship to primary care access. So I think that's quite a thing, not from a CQC point of view, because it was focused on the CQC, because that came out of the patient the pulse survey, if you remember from what patients were saying. It is a national issue, and some of the processes that we have to do are nationally driven, because it's quite restricted in some respect from a primary care point of view what we can and can't do. But I think the exec team, just give you a bit of reassurance, they're all over this. We've had a lot of conversations about how we improve primary care access, because it's a massive #1 issue across everybody. And if you're asking anybody nationally, and sometimes the things that we're asked to do don't really help what we're trying to do. So we are doing a lot of work on that. So if we can filter that through the quality committee, I think that would be really helpful to get that assurance piece. We're also linking it to the patient groups as well. Excuse me. And I think that's why it's been helpful, because no one rule fits everybody.
Oh, have some water.
I'm on holiday tomorrow. I just sort of think I'm going to get a bit of a cold, but anyway. So I think you're right, David. There's different things for different people, because some people like to access digitally, some people like the NHS app, some people like triage, some people don't. So it's about trying to get the best solution to fit the majority of people, which is what we're trying to do.
Okay, have some water while I take Mike, Michelle. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on Stuart's point about dry runs. First of all, I do know the trust does dry runs because I've taken part in one. But I'd just like to ask for a little bit of assurance, and I think you'll get it, on how we boundary scan in terms of other industries. Very recently, a couple of supermarket online deliveries have dropped unexpectedly, but the most magnificent example was air traffic control. And I'm just wondering how we scan, any lessons that are learned outside our normal field of expertise.
Anyone want to pick that up? Lynn.
I'll come back on that. Yeah, that's where our local resilience forums are excellent, Mike. So they do, in effect, that sort of job primarily on our behalf. So where there are learnings and relevant information from those types of scenarios, then they do bring them to the fore as well. And then they do inform the exercises that are run as well. So we do get that opportunity to understand and have that information from those types of incidents elsewhere.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay. Right, I can't see anybody else's hands up. I mean, I know it's been a helpful discussion because it is all about access, and part of that access is the patient experience, isn't it? And what they come away with. And I know the focus on our GP practice, but just to take away, when I visited the memory clinic in Coltman in Hull a few weeks ago, I think they're waiting on some upgrade technology, so that we had a discussion about waiting lists and about when people couldn't make an appointment and how quickly they could get back to them and get to somebody else to maybe take that appointment instead of them. And I think they're still waiting for an upgrade in their texting technology to be able to do that as well. So, I mean, there's a bit of focus on primary care, but technology across some of our services is a key issue, and even being able to text someone effectively automatically to remind them about appointments is really key here, and also to get them engaged so we can maybe offer that appointment to someone else. Technology should be really helping us with this. But yeah, okay, fine. Let's move on then, if there's any other question, and obviously some of the issues will come up later. We've got the publications and highlights report. Oh, sorry, no, let's ratify. First of all, is board willing to ratify the emergency preparedness, resilience and response arrangements policy? All those in favour of ratifying that? Thank you very much. And all those in favour of ratifying the risk management policy, please? Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's move on then to publications and highlights. Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to go into it anymore because people will have read the actual document. We've highlighted on the front. We've seen a couple of these things already come through the Chief Executive report, such as Martha's Rule, etc. But I'll just take it for questions, Chair.
Any questions? And I think it's a really well laid out report as well. I really like the fact that we have it and there's a bit of commentary, and I think it's really easy to follow on this. So I appreciate that very much in terms of its signposting. Any questions?
Thank you.
Nope. Okay, happy reading to everybody for that one. We move on then to item number 9, which is the annual operation plan. Now it says final draft, but Michelle and I had a chat yesterday. This isn't the final draft. It is a first draft because there's more work to be done. And of course, the centre, NHS England, haven't produced their operational plan yet. So I just wanted to sort of reassure board, but especially non-executive directors about that. And I know, as Francis has indicated, he's got some questions too. So let's move on with that in people's mind. And which is it, Pete? Pete, are you leading on this? Pete,
it is.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just do a brief introduction because I'm sure there's lots of questions on this, Caroline, but thank you for confirming it is the first draft of the plan and recognise it's where we are in the planning cycle. So since the ICS was formed, there's not been a requirement for the trust to do an individual organisational plan like we used to do. However, we still think it's good practice to produce one. So this year we've started to pull one together. You know, attached is what you've got in front of you. It's the current draft of the plan. You know, it has been written in the absence of the planning guidance, which I'm sat here today still waiting for. You know, so obviously we will review the plan, you know, when the planning guidance comes out. I'm not expecting it to fundamentally change what's being written, but you never know if anything might come left field. You know, this document has been to ODG and EMT as a first class, and it probably summarises what's in the divisional service plans, the trust workforce plan and the trust financial plan. You know, our intention is to update this further once we get the feedback from the board, once the national planning guidance comes out. And then obviously we'd take all that feedback back into operational delivery group and then back to EMT to actually produce the final draft of the plan. You know, I guess what I would say is, you know, this plan has been put together in quite a condensed period of time, you know, but the intention is to follow the process next year where we will have more time to have more views of it through probably a strategic board session, informal EMT and the like. So, you know, it is what it is at the moment. I'll stop there and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Pete. I think part of it is also about just, you know, what's meant to leap out from this plan, and to find it. And I found, you know, it seemed the document seemed, it was a very large document, but you know, probably some clarity around it as well about what are the most important things. And I'm sure that will come up in other comments. It didn't fit quite well for me. Francis.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, I fully acknowledge this is draft and the time frame that Pete and the team have had to do it. And then there's the balance between an operational plan and a strategic plan. But I'm with Caroline, there needs to be something which really jumps out. So I was going to link together quite a few bits of the agenda today. So as I said, the performance figures, so the DTOC that was in Michelle's report earlier on, the waiting times later on the performance, out of area later on performance, that mental health review and how that will eventually fit into this, the King's Fund report on the shift from primary to community is all part of this plan. So if I then look at the plan itself, and the key to me also is how the ICB and ICS might impact on the plan. So it talks about system working at the start. It talks about provider collaboratives at the start. So it's as with Caroline, we have an executive summary, but for me, the executive summary doesn't really pull out the key priorities that everybody is very clear at the very, very start. These are the key priorities for the trust. This is what we are focusing on. And then there's a huge amount of detail coming afterwards for you to get into that. I think it needs to pull out more from a financial perspective. And one of the questions I was going to ask Pete was, do we know, you've got a bit in here about the finance, and there's a bit in your report later on, but what is the exit rate for the ICB coming out of 23-24, and therefore the amounts of money that are actually going to be available and how that might impact on us going forward? And then the other area for me which needs a bit more emphasis is the productivity, which just seems to come very late at the end, just one diagram, which again to me needs to be upfront in terms of productivity and how we pull all of that productivity together. So it's kind of how this plan links back to the overall strategic plan, which is where some of the stuff I've talked about fits in, but then how we make sure that at the start of the plan we're really, really clear about the priorities that the trust is addressing over the next 12 months as a result of this, and then the detail comes later on behind that. And then for me, well, obviously one of the key risks on that front page, I think, unless Pete's going to tell me differently, is finance, because one of the key risks to all of this is the finance. And whilst we seem to be, and again I'll let Pete address this, as in a reasonable position, it's the impact of ICB on us going forward. And then also any changes that we're going to discuss on the private board that might flow out of the ICB priorities. So I've kind of thrown a fair bit in there, but Pete, I don't know if you want to start with the finance bit and the exit rate for the ICB and for ourselves as well.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. So I guess, fully accept that maybe we could do a better exec summary on this document, and I'll take that on board, and I'm sure we'll have a discussion at exec on that and how we can frame that front and centre. I guess the exit rate, if I'm brutally honest, it depends who you ask and when you ask them, Francis. It's anything from 250 million to 100 million, depending on who you ask and the level of risk in there. But, if we just cast our minds back to this time last year, the underlying financial position was around the 250 million mark for the ICS, and that's a figure that has been discussed recently, and some of the work Grant Thornton doing at the moment should help to confirm that. So whilst it's not published, it's around the 250 million mark is what's been quoted as the underlying ICS financial position.
So obviously that puts us in a fairly tight position coming into this year.
I think what it says to me, Francis, is there's no funding for growth potentially, and obviously we've got increasing demand for our services, and some of that we've addressed non-recurrently this year, and quite often when we've talked about the performance report in previous trust boards, we have been aware of the fact that the non-recurrent resource we've put in this year may not be available next year, and what would that impact be on our waiting list and other performance measures? Michelle may want to comment, but it's an increasingly challenging environment, and I know Caroline and Michelle went to the chair chief exec session, but I've got to be careful what I say in a public board meeting, but the more we talk about the challenge, it isn't going to go away just talking about it.
I'm happy just to come in there. Take your point, Francis. It's a really good point to make, but I think we've tried to produce something. I mean, we can go back into the strategic piece in a minute, but from a financial piece, we've tried to go on what our position is in relationship to the system, and we've made some relatively sensible assumptions about efficiency and no growth, and this issue around the workforce piece. I think we've tried to do it on a solid architecture, irrespective at the moment of what happens around us, which is why it's only in that draft form. We'll have a little bit more, I think, totality when we get the national picture, but we're only going on what we've been told by Julian Kelly and Amanda Pritchard and what we can do as an organisation, which isn't ideal at this stage, but I think it's better to do that than to make some bigger assumptions and be found wanting. So I think what we're trying to do is something that we feel is deliverable at this stage, and then obviously we can reflect that. So in a bit, you remember when we did worst case, best case scenarios for foundation trusts? I think what we're trying to do is pitch it more towards the worst case scenario rather than the mid case and the best case, if that makes any sense.
It does, and I was just trying to flush out quite rightly where you and Pete have come from, that we can do so much, but we're then restricted by what is around us. And whilst there's pressure, which is why I was kind of linking it to our performance, there's pressure for us to improve our DTOC and our waiting times, etc. Some of that is prevented because of the financial position that we find ourselves in.
It is, and it comes back to the contracting piece as well, because I think even though we get block contracts, if we're not given any particular extra money or money for waiting times, we can't. But yes, we do our best in relationship to the money that we've got to move that around the system, but technically we're getting the money to deliver the trajectories for the long-term plan. If there's any surplus in relationship to that, we can move that into waiting lists, but that's where it becomes really difficult in relationship to what we've got. So even though our priorities might be our delay position and our waiting list position, the commissioned budget comes in for the long-term plan at the moment, and it's balancing that off. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Francis?
I'll let others come in.
Okay, Phil, and then I've got Stuart, and then I've got Mike.
Yeah, I'd reiterate a lot of what Francis has said, and I'm relieved to hear that it's an early draft rather than a final draft. When my eyes stop on things, they always stop on things like community and primary care, and I didn't see anything really in there that helps us transition to community and primary care becoming the cornerstone of the NHS. But I'd like just particularly to emphasise, I'd like to see a lot more maturity around health inequalities, and what's put in there seems very weak. And a specific example, under children and learning disability, there's no measures to improve physical health of people with learning disability when it's a major issue. So I sort of feel happier to know that it's an early draft. But to some degree, it does still feel like a plan where somebody's just been filling stuff into boxes rather than getting that real sense of what we're trying to achieve as the trust. So I look forward to seeing later drafts.
Thank you, Phil. Stuart?
Just the risk of repeating what's been said. I agree with all the comments of Francis and Phil. I think the other factor is, for us as a board, if we're going to have a plan like this, we need to make sure we monitor it. So it needs to link back to our performance reporting, which link was not clear to me. At a more general level, I think from the conversation that we have in this meeting and before, I think we're in quite a difficult position to set a plan against a background of very uncertain external factors. And it could be that just we have to be comfortable with having some kind of rolling plan, which may never firm up for the next 6 months, but we obviously have to give some direction to staff and divisions at every level of the organisation about what we're working on, and I'm confident we are doing that in reality. So I do think we just have to live with that uncertainty as a board, which may be uncomfortable for some people, but I think it's kind of reflects the environment we're in.
Okay. Did you want to come in there, Pete, or can I take Mike?
I think it was just on the rolling plan comment, Carolyn. I think we do already have that in many respects. You'll see at the back of the document, and I know it's a long document, the commissioning intentions, which is the priorities we've agreed at place, which is kind of reflecting, notwithstanding the conversation we've had on money, if any investment is available, this is where we would prioritise it. And we've agreed that, jointly. So that's not just us putting a list of proposals together. The delivery groups that Lynn chairs have actually jointly agreed those priorities. So when resource can be identified, we know where we want to invest it. It's just the challenges.
I think the point is, Pete, that the rolling plan is also, what has to roll also is our performance, the reality of our performance capacity and ambition. And so a lot of the graphs that we see in the performance report are contingent on resource coming through. Resource might not coming through in time. So it's like holding that uncertainty, both about the inputs being uncertain, but also about the translation of those inputs into activity and outputs. So I think I just think we're in that kind of in that environment, and I realistically will be for in the whole election period and beyond for a while.
Yeah. I think just to reiterate what Stuart's saying there, I think it's about how does this document actually sit or has some synergy with our performance data, which is telling us where we're really strong and other areas where we're actually there's a real challenge and we're weaker than we want to be. And then also the context of both our own finances, but the wider pressures outside of our control as well. And I think, you know, again, in the executive summary, obviously this is a draft, so this is a draft that I've seen as well. You know, it says it sets out an ambitious programme of transformation and service development priorities for 24-25, but the document doesn't really sit that within the actual wider environment we're dealing with. So I think there's a real think about this draft and how it's structured needs to be thought about, and that's coming through strongly from non-execs. Mike and then Dean.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, one in Pete's area about IT and forensics driver challenges, and the thing about access to the internet and so on and online services has been quite a problem, both because of security risks and the actual architecture there for the IT. And I'm just wondering how we've moved on that. Second one, team question, apologies for the detail, but I feel strongly about it. And that's the lack of meaningful activities in forensic. And I'm just wondering how innovative we can be. Other places have been blessed, for example, Rampton, they have woodworking shops and goodness knows what else. At Ardash, they've got the Victorian Wall Garden for horticulture and so on. I just wondered whether we have anything more innovative like that. Animal care has always been one of my big things, and people say, well, it all gets complicated with vets and rotas and feeding and things. Well, yes, it does, but it's a good thing that patients get involved in the rotas and so on. So, for example, the women's unit has guinea pigs, which are small animals, and they also in the wider environment have chickens, which was something that I raised when I first came into the trust, and I've actually paid for some chickens voluntarily through Health Stars to go into the Inspire network, but nothing seems to have happened, so I don't know where my chickens have gone. So sorry for the randomness, but meaningful activity is a real big issue for inpatient units, as we all know. Yeah. So this ended the first lesson.
Thank you, Mike. Dean?
Thanks, Caroline. Just conscious that you'll be summing up on this shortly. And it was just, I guess, just bringing in the governance points for boards that just make it very difficult for us when there is no national guidance. Here we are in March and expected to be, delivering service and performance into next year, and just the very difficult position that puts executives in, with that responsibility to be held to account in what they're doing. So it's just, I guess, in practical terms, recognise what people are trying to do here. But in terms of getting sign off from the board on this, is whether we will need an additional meeting or some sort of email exchange on the financial plan in particular once that guidance is out, so we can appropriately sign it off and recognise that to some extent operationally people are driving in that rollover programme. But we do, I think, need to make it clear to the ICB that there is a role for the board in signing off these plans when they come through, and they can't just be at the behest of, the guidance has come out, sign it off in the next couple of days. We need to put due diligence into that, I think.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Francis?
Thanks, Caroline. Seeing as I kicked this all off at the start, it would be really helpful, therefore, if this then we could have a discussion as a board at the next away day. I don't know how busy the next away day is, but this would seem like a natural thing to drop into the away day, as long as it gives the exec enough time around it. We may get some guidance by then, we may not. I've seen in the chat room from Pete and Dean about inflation and people hoping it'll drop further. But that seems like the natural place to take this, which could then come back to full board the month after. Just a thought.
Thank you, Francis. And obviously there is the inflation issue. That might be a reason why they're waiting. But I think, as Pete says in the chat box as well, the high inflation that we've been dealing with and the pressure it's put on are still there. Even if inflation's gone down, they've created its own challenges. And they will be there, as I think your words, Pete, baked in, and we're going to have to carry the pressures of that, even if inflation does go down in the months and what have it. We won't realise the benefits of that for a while, I would suggest. But yeah, thank you for that. Lynn, you had your hand up, it's gone down. Did you want to mention something?
I was just going to come back on Mike's point about therapeutic meaningful activity in our secure services. And not surprisingly, Mike, that's a huge focus. Over the last year, we've employed a dedicated educational advisor. And the purpose of that role is to really connect our patients into educational programs. Some of those are obviously accredited. It means that patients have access to qualifications, but it's that vocational piece as well in terms of preparing people for discharge. That's quite an innovative approach to employ an educator directly into the service to provide that expertise. There is a dedicated recovery college that our patients can access in terms of secure services. We can always do more around meaningful activity, but you'll remember that we developed the gym where the old swimming pool was, and that was co-produced with service users as an activity that they really wanted to develop. And we do have a wood workshop, Mike, as well. In fact, we're doing some work around the sort of future intentions of that right now. As well, so just to give some assurance that that really actually has developed anyway over the last year and will continue to do so.
Thank you for that, Lynn.
That's wonderful.
Perhaps it would be helpful as well to maybe have some more information about we're doing all these things, what the take up is.
Yeah.
So, you know, we can have cardio walls in every unit, but if nobody's using them, they're an expensive piece of kit. So it'd be interesting to know both about the vocational, but also the things we do to relieve boredom. I think that's a massive issue for people who we're looking after in our units. And just know, you know, what is the take up, who is taking it up, who isn't taking it up in terms of that, and is what we're providing actually, you know, is it their jam, so to speak, in terms of what they want. But yeah, we've just got a message from Priyanka in the chat. She noticed there were some cooking lessons for inpatients, which I thought was very good. Yeah, that is happening across our units as well. I'm very much aware of that too. Okay, right. Okay, to round up this discussion, I think obviously there's been a lot said there. I think generally the point is that actually in terms of the full board being cited on this plan, that's really important. I know it would be useful, actually. I know you said it at the beginning, Pete, about the timetabling. If you could just sort of email me afterwards or something about what you're suggesting the timetable would be. I will look at the strategic board to see if we can actually carve out some space there on that day. But I think also the other messages are just about, you know, how this report really reflects what we discuss on performance, but also on finance, and also how it sits in terms of the wider issues that are affecting us in terms of our decision making that we don't have control of as well. And I think there's a sort of bit of a reality check here about a document that is set in reality about what we're dealing with, but also about how all this information in here, you know, how is it fundamentally going to affect the performance data where we need to do better, and therefore the priorities within that as well. So I think there's a lot of information here, which I think if it could be looked and restructured in a way that meets some of those asks, it can happen. But at the moment, it just looks a bit like a standalone document with lots of information, but not a focus that is on some of those issues that colleagues have raised today. So I think that's worth, that's a task to look at, I think. So that, I think, is my summary of that. And of course, the other point I would say is also about what Dean said about the financial side of things as well, and getting that information from the centre about going forward, because that could, not just for us, but for lots of trusts, affect the desired transformations that we want to do in the year ahead. And this document needs to be at least aware of that, even if we haven't got the detail when we want to produce this in the way we might want to in more detail. So if that is, we take that away, that's been a helpful discussion on this draft. And if I could just get from Pete or someone just a sort of sense, for me to make sure I've clocked it exactly what the sort of timetabling for this will be, and for Stella to have a chat about putting it on the strategic board in April. Okay, so thank you for that discussion, a very good conversation, and I have, done with it, obviously everyone wanting to do the best we can and have the best document we can on this. Great, lovely. All right then, moving then on to Karen, the Leadership Competency Framework, please.
Thank you, Caroline. So the paper that's within your board pack today is a summary of the general principles and actions for board members as a result of the recently published Leadership Competency Framework. Now, just for some sort of background and context, this particular document that's been published doesn't sit on its own. It's very closely aligned to the Fit and Proper Persons Test. So we know, and we've had many conversations of late at board level around the changes to the Fit and Proper Persons Test that were announced back in the autumn, and recently coming into the fore. And when the Fit and Proper Persons Test was refreshed with new elements aligned to it, there was also a suggestion that there would be a leadership competency framework that would sit next to it, that would look at assessing board members against a number of leadership domains, as it were. We have recently seen this published at the beginning of March, I do believe, and this document provides a bit of a summary following it from a wider conversation that a few of us had in terms of what the next steps are around how we embed this and deliver it for our entire board. So in terms of the Fit and Proper Persons Test, which is completely separate to this, actions are on track in that regard. In regards to the Leadership Competency Framework, we've actually decided to take a bit of a staged approach in terms of how we launch this. And there are a few actions within it that we need to launch and implement over a course of a period of time. The first action is that we ensure all role descriptions for board members are aligned to the Leadership Competency Framework, and that it is mentioned and referenced, and that we draw attention to it within there in terms of the leadership competencies that we expect of our leaders at board level. And then there's work around appraisals for all board members. So as part of the recent launch, there was a suite of tools published to support the delivery of the chair's appraisal in line with the framework. So I know Francis and Caroline are on with delivering Caroline's appraisal in line with the framework this year. So Caroline, you are our guinea pig, aren't you? I think we've established as part of this. As part of the document, it does talk about how we measure the leadership competencies of our wider board, our executive members and our non-executive members of the board, also in appraisals. However, the supporting guidance has not been released for that, and that is expected in autumn. So we will be moving ahead with ensuring that our role descriptors for any up and coming board level roles are updated. As I said, Caroline's appraisal will fall in line. And next year's appraisals for board members, so the wider board members beyond Caroline, so for 2025, will be aligned to the Leadership Competency Framework, but not for this year. What we have decided is that we will probably put an addendum to our formal appraisal form that will enable a conversation. It will draw attention to it, and we can have those sort of wider conversations about competency in accordance with the domains, but we won't be fully establishing it for our wider board this year. So in a nutshell, that is it. And I do know that we are going to have a wider conversation at our strategic session at the end of April. So there will be a really good opportunity at that point to really once you've had an opportunity to digest this, and we can have a really full conversation then. But I'm happy to take questions at this stage.
Thanks, Karen. And just to say, the suggestions of how we're going to proceed arose out of Francis, myself, Karen, I think Stella. We all met together to go through this, didn't we? And felt this was the best way to handle it. Francis.
Yeah, I think it's a great summary from Karen, really, really helpful. All I would ask now is, for those of you who haven't yet replied on Caroline's appraisal, could I have your responses? And also, that's a form that you need to be thinking about to play into the discussion that Karen talked about at the April session. So thoughts on that, because that's the form that's come out from the centre. So any thoughts on that, if you could bring them to that meeting, would be helpful.
Thank you, Francis. Okay, thanks, Karen, for that. Now, can I just Alison, how are you for time? Because I know we're running late. Do you need to get away? Caroline. Would you like to take your item now?
I'm fine if you want to carry on, and I'll just wait. No problem.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. So therefore, Karen, you're up again. National Staff Survey.
Thank you. I'm actually really pleased to be able to talk today about our National Staff Survey results. And I know that I've had a number of conversations probably since January, as we've kind of had the some of the raw data and various reports come out at various sort of incremental points between sort of then and now. However, the Staff Survey national publication was on the 7th of March, at which point the embargo was lifted. So the results that I'm going to present to you today, from a high level perspective, are the full staff survey results that show our trust against national averages as well as our benchmark group. And our benchmark group, just for information and clarity, are 51 mental health and community trusts. So they are our comparators. So a lot of our results we measure compared to national averages and benchmark group averages as well. So in terms of some of the really positive highlights to come out of the staff survey. So Caroline made reference to it during her earlier report at the beginning today. But we are in a position where we are recognised as one of the best performing trusts as for the question recommend as a place to work, which is phenomenal. And I think what I will say at this point, and I know Michelle absolutely has said this a number of times, if everyone casts their mind back, you know, even if we go back to 2015, 2016, the trust was positioning as the worst in the country, not even in the worst in the sector, across many of the themes and questions. So actually these results, everybody should be proud of, because they're a testament of a lot of hard work and a really encouraging positive journey that the trust has been on over a course of quite a few years now. So the trust, the National Staff Survey has a number of questions, and they aligned to people promise themes. So we tend to carry out an assessment of where we sit against our own score last year, against our benchmark group and the national average. So what we can say is that the trust positions better than the national average across all people promise themes, which is fantastic. It's absolutely the place that we want to be in terms of that performance. What we can say is that alongside each of the people promise themes are a number of sub-themes. So there are 21 subcategories. And having looked at that, we also position better than the national average across all sub-theme categories as well, which again is phenomenal. It's really great. Then when we turn our attention to our comparison to our benchmark group, we position better than the average for our benchmark group in all but one people promise area, and the one that we don't, we are equal to the average. So again, a really strong, solid position in that area. Again, the report does pull out our position against the benchmark group for the sub-theme categories, and again, a really strong position. There are 2 sub-theme categories where we are marginally below the average, and 1 area where we're equal to. So again, really strong position. In terms of some of the key questions, there are 5 quick key questions that we kind of almost instantly turn our eyes to when we look at the staff survey, and they are that people feel that their role makes a difference to service users and carers, that care of patients and service users is the organisation's top priority, that the organisation acts on concerns raised by patients and service users, recommend as a place to work, and recommend as a place for treatment. And we score better than the sector and the national scores in all of those questions. And actually what we have also done is scored better across all those questions than our own scores last year in 2022, but quite significantly in some areas. And again, Caroline made reference to that jump in her earlier report. So overall, we are very strongly positioned, and we've got an awful lot to celebrate. However, what we do is use the survey, and it's not our only mechanism for feedback in the organisation, and we're very clear that we want to hear feedback at any given point throughout the year, and we have multiple kind of temperature checks through the pulse survey as well. But the staff survey is it's a key tool for us from a recruitment and retention perspective. So it is important that off the back of it, we do look at some of the areas that we can improve on and we can strive to be better at. So we have identified that particularly there are some areas around our EDI agenda, and obviously we've welcomed John and Eve today and talked about the strides that we've made around disability, discrimination and support. But there are some key areas that we are assessing in terms of what our actions could be off the back of that. The only other thing that I would mention is that our survey provider, which was IQVIA, are attending the May board to do a full comprehensive presentation of the survey results. They'll give you a full presentation at that particular point in time. And in terms of the other next steps, we have fed individual reports out into the business now. So we are expecting our divisions and directorates to look at their results and start to think about their key areas that they want to focus on over the course of the next 12 months and beyond. And equally, we'll be picking this up as an exec team in terms of, like I mentioned before, looking at some of those key areas of focus and actually what resultant actions do we want to see and want to champion going forward so that we can see an improvement in those areas too. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks very much, Karen. And in terms of actually turnout as well, we saw some amazing uplifts, particularly in community and primary and our forensic services, who did a presentation to our governing body at their last Council of Governors meeting. So, I mean, really interesting what they were doing and learning for other parts of the trust in how you engage staff in this and use it to actually engage with staff on other issues as well. It's like, you know, multitasking really in that sense, but, you know, they did really well in terms of their percentages going up too. Thanks, Karen. Okay, Dean, Francis and David.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I really appreciate the sort of update and the historical perspective. We often say, don't we, that culture doesn't change overnight, and here's a way, I think, where you can see a positive culture change over a number of years through being sort of persistent and intentional about what it is that we want to change. But I think, Karen, you also struck the right tone, you know, lots to celebrate, but ambitious to do even better, and important for our staff and patients that we continue to do that. I just, you know, wanted to highlight, I think, because also my role as a sort of board champion around Speak Up, and you know, Alison's on the call as well, but just some really positive results about people feeling confident to raise concerns and feeling safe to do so, and that their organisation would do something about it. So those benchmarked really well compared to others. So again, some good work going on in the organisation on that. But thanks, Karen. I know you've said it's everyone's job, but I know a lot of effort goes in around the HR team and you and colleagues to sort of make this happen and sort of pursue it to make sure we're getting good feedback from people. So thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Francis, and then David, and then Michelle.
Again, I'd reiterate what the whole team has done, which is really exceptional work over the years. And I think Karen's done an excellent summary on that front sheet, pulling out the positives and the areas to focus on, which is great. A couple of things that I thought were really good and interesting was on the Promise 7, the We Are a Team, and how the team is working really well together. And have we hit 77% on a shared set of objectives, which is excellent, and a meeting to discuss team issues, which I thought was great. I thought the score we got on flexible working was really good. If you look at that, we hit 71% more or less, which was well above the average. So all of the work the team have put in on that, really, really good. In terms of the wanting to always get better that Dean mentioned, again, we did really well on this, so it's not a criticism, but there seems to be some mismatch on the appraisal bit, because appraisal's helping improve how you do your job. There's lots of really good scores above it, and then we only get 26% on that. Still one of the best, in fact, the best. So I'm not complaining because it's better than everybody else, but at 26%, you think, well, how can everybody be really up on the fact that we've got all that teamwork on objectives? You know, we're scoring highly on opportunities to develop their career, yet it doesn't seem to be linked, because there's two questions: helping them to improve their job and helping agree clear objectives score quite low when everything above it scores quite high. So there obviously seems to be a disconnect for people in the organisation between how the appraisal helps them do that and the fact that they think it is happening. So it's just a thought, that's all. But
yeah, I
overall,
think that's sorry, Francis, I think that's a really good point. I clock that as well about that disconnect too. Karen, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. It really is a paradox, isn't it, in terms of how those results are presented, and actually even the positioning in terms of the response around it nationally and sort of across the benchmark group. And all I can say is, you know, we as an organisation, we have made it an absolute priority to ensure that we are delivering as close to 100% of appraisals within the window. And the next step, probably for the last 2 years, has been around us delivering quality appraisal conversations. So we've already stepped up over the course of the last 2 years, training, support, guidance, tools to support the delivery of higher quality appraisals. And I think now what we need to see is that embedded. We've stepped that up again this year, so appraisals are soon to launch, and we need to see that play out and see how that comes into the next survey. And I think there may be a point where we need to it might be that educational piece, Francis, maybe about making those links.
To me, it is, because if you look at it, I think you're doing a really great job. I mean, you look at 94%. The appraisal, they've had it, and you look at the other scores which suggest people are getting the message. It's just how you link those two questions, because it's obviously happening, but it's not being seen for some reason. That's all.
Pete, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, if I could, Caroline, because as you might imagine, my nature is I've analysed my own staff results, and we scored similar to the trust on that one, and it's a frustration of mine, because the positive score is those people who said when their appraisal helped them do their job effectively. Yes, definitely. So I was in the 20% mark on that, but then 50% of my staff said yes to some extent, which I still see as positive, but obviously it doesn't count to the score. So I think sometimes when you get underneath the detail of it, you realise that 70% of people are still saying yes, the appraisal helps me do my job, but only 20% are saying yes, definitely. We've got a bulk of staff that say yes to some extent, which, if I'm brutally honest, I'd expect quite most of my staff would probably say yes to some extent.
Yeah.
So it's just, there are some nuances in the way the data is presented, I think.
Yeah. I suppose then it's when you say yes to some extent, in your mind, you're thinking about all those other things you get. So it does to some extent, but it's not the only tool in the box.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good point. David.
Thank you, Chair. What a superb report, really. Congratulations, everybody. However, as a gay man on the board, when I read the line around people experiencing discrimination because of sexual orientation, and that in the bottom 20%, that really sent my antennae twirling. And I've given this quite a bit of thought, and I went along to the Rainbow Alliance last week to see if there's anything that we really need to be aware of. And I think some of this is the wider societal issues that we need to be really mindful in how we unpick some of this, because the question is around sexual orientation. We talk about LGBT, we talk about LGBTQIA. Some of these things are different gender issues to the sexual orientation issue. When I went to the Rainbow Alliance last week, I picked up no issues at all around lesbians, gay men or bisexual people. There was a lot of conversation around trans and trans inclusion and trans issues. And I suspect that is where we're drawing some of this lower performance. But I think we need to be quite deliberate in pulling that apart, and also in how we describe that. I sometimes think the LGBTQIA description, we're trying to throw so many different groups of people into one acronym that it doesn't give us the opportunity to really tackle the issue that's there. And some of this stuff is much wider than Humber. So some of these changes, some of the way society is changing, it's across Western society. So we just need to give this some quite specific and deliberate thought, and I'm happy to help with anything I can on that.
Thank you for that, David, and the offer of support on that. You're right. I mean, it's it can be too generic, can't it, sometimes, and you don't then. It's within that. It's the depth within it, isn't it, in terms of what people are experiencing, which is not going to be the same even if they all attend one group. Absolutely. Thank you. Karen, do you want to say anything on that? Or just.
Yeah, I was just going to type a little note to you, but absolutely, David, okay. I completely agree with you. And I think we would certainly, John has got a lens on this particularly, and we'll certainly be happy to involve you in conversations about how we can maybe dissect that apart a little bit and how we can move forward some actions. I'd really value your input.
Great. Michelle.
No, thanks very much for that, Dave. Great comments, and yes, some great observations as well. So yeah, we will pick up on that, and any offer of help is great for the receivers, So that's fine. I was just I'll pick up Bianca's point. Bianca, the staff survey, all the questions are are nationally set. So we can't change them. We can add a couple that we may want to add if we're looking at a particular area, but the actual questions are nationally set and actually driven. It's quite a lengthy process, as you'll see as we get into this next year. I just wanted to say thank you to the team and thank you to the organisation, certainly the operational managers as well, who I know have done an enormous amount of work to get the uptake to be as high as it was. It is a really good reflective sample of the organisation. But I just want to give the board a bit of reassurance, and it was mentioned earlier on that yes, they are fantastic results. Yes, we are absolutely constantly working on our culture, because we have to continue to do that culture, and it's one of the things, as you know, I'm talking to the national team about, and I think part of that's probably why we've got the culture of care developing as a national scheme, because we have to continue our work on our culture. But I just want to give the board a bit of reassurance that yes, they are great results. Yes, we've got pockets absolutely that we need to look at in this year's results, which we will do, but we will continue not to take our foot off the pedal in relationship to the overall staff survey and the overall issues that what we're doing around staff health and wellbeing. Flexibility, there's still a lot of work to do on flexibility. We had a great session with the staff side organisations a few weeks ago. One of the key things there was around, we're still not promoting the issue around flexible staff working enough. We think we've done shed loads, but it's that interpretation. To be honest, so we're going to do some more. So just to give the board a bit of reassurance that we will, through the workforce committee, but through all the other structures that we've got, continue to develop this aspect, and especially the cultural aspect.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. I've got no more hands up. Another useful conversation on this. We've had several in the last few months. A big round of applause to everybody in your team, Karen, and just a big thank you to all our staff across the trust who actually filled in these questionnaires. I mean, my goodness, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions to answer on this, and I do think on just a human level whether people just get a fatigue when they get, maybe on that appraisal one, by the time they get to that one they're feeling a bit of fatigue by the end of the process. I don't know, but a big thank you to all our staff who fill this in, and I hope this conversation today for any staff who might be listening or later on just reflects how importantly we take it. And how we then apply the learning from this to the different activities we're doing across the trust and taking on board. I hope that, from the top of this organisation, we take this really seriously. So thank you for your participation. Great. We move on to item 12, and we've got some associate hospital managers to approve in terms of their reappointment. Kwame. You're on mute, Kwame. Yeah, no, you're not.
Can I speak to this one, Caroline?
Yes, sure,
I was
Mike.
looking for the page. Yeah. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it does say to ask the public board to approve the appointment. It's just asked the board. We happen to be in the public meeting, which is wholly appropriate. And these two hospital manager contracts expire as detailed, or have expired as detailed. I've taken part in the reviews, and both are recommended for reappointment. I've also taken up with Michelle Nolan and at MHLC. We will now, in line with the terms of reference, receive a report with all contract start and end dates, so we can better coordinate these renewals with the board meetings, because there have been a number of glitches recently, which has neither pleased me nor the rest of the board, I think. But I do recommend these two review. Mike Hood, to be reappointed. Mike Hood in particular has made a sterling performance in this notice on a number of occasions. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mike. Kwame, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think Mike's sentiments are right. What we need to do is to review this appointment as quickly as possible, so that there is no gap in between their reappointment and coming to the board for ratifying. So we're working hard on that. Also, as part of a bigger picture, is continue to look for more associate hospital managers, so that there's a breadth and diversity within the group. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dean's put in the chat box that himself and Phil have met with Michelle Nolan on an outline training programme for themselves as NEDs, who are going to become associate hospital managers in line with the national guidance. And Mike, thank you for raising that. To be honest, there was no reason why this shouldn't have been factored in, so we could have dealt with this earlier before their contracts ran out. So I'm glad Mike and I have discussed this, Michelle and I have discussed this as well, and I won't be expecting it to happen again, dare I say. Yeah, that can be minuted. No, you don't have to minute that. That's fine. I've said it. Okay, and just to say thank you very much to Mike and Lynn, Mike Hood and Lynn Hood, who are being reappointed today. Thank you very much to them for their service. It is very much appreciated. And therefore, we'll go to approval. Is the board in favour of approving the extended contracts for these 2 associate hospital managers? Brilliant. Thank you so much. Right, okay, patient-led assessment of care environment. We've got the report. Thank you for that. Pete, anything to add, or can we note this and the work that's being done? It's very important to knowing what's happening within our units and our estates team involvement. Pete?
Yeah, I'll take the report as read, Chair. I guess the 3 things I'd pull out from this report are, despite challenges of access, and we discussed that earlier on visits, we did manage to visit all our units and undertake the assessments in the window. You can see the scores for food. We never score particularly well on organisational food, and that's because of the size and nature of our units. However, the ward food score generally is in more positive, which reflects the quality of food that is served to our patients and residents. And I guess, it's in the body of the report, but the one unit where scores did fall this year was Granville Court. Since the publication of the results, members of my team have visited, as have Michelle and a member of Hillary's team, and that's provided us with reassurance on the quality and the condition of the unit. And I think it's fair to say that the scores that were recorded by the assessment were probably influenced by the fact we know we've got a planned refurb, so we'll learn from that for future assessments. We probably shot ourselves in the foot on that one a little bit, and I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for your candour on that. Michelle?
Just to give the board a bit of reassurance, obviously I was quite concerned about the results. I went to visit Granville last week, and I can actually say it was actually a lot better than I anticipated seeing, to be honest. Yes, it needed a little bit of paint here and then. There was a few little chips on the doors from the obviously the larger wheelchairs that we've got, and I think the staff themselves were disappointed with the results and probably agreed that they had sort of said, well, we're moving because it's terrible and we need the extra space, etc. But just to give the board a bit of reassurance, I have been up there. I'm really looking forward to the plans as well, but it wasn't as bad as what I anticipated it was going to be, and lots of really good practice going off from the staff point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And they're such a fabulous team up at Granville Court, aren't they? I've been there myself, and I know, they're sort of obviously the management of the changes, obviously for looking after our patients while those changes are going on for the bigger sort of construction works that's going to be necessary is a big issue. But thanks for that very topical and up-to-date assurance, having been up there just recently, Michelle. Thank you for that. So we'll note that. Thank you very much. And we will move on to Alison, then we'll take a break very after that. Alison.
Morning, everybody. Good to see colleagues. Just here to provide the update on our mental health, learning disability and autism collaborative programme across Humber and North Yorkshire. Hopefully you'll find the papers comprehensive, but I'll just pick out a few highlights and updates. So we had a really successful trauma-informed annual conference this year, with some really good speakers. This is an excellent programme around youth justice and working with all of our partners across the system, and we're already starting to see reoffending rates falling within that age group. So probably bring more back on that, but I just wanted to highlight the conference and the great work that the Alliance is doing. I won't spend too much time on planning because I know that's been picked up through the meeting, and we're still awaiting the planning guidance and working with colleagues and Pete around the challenges that we face with potential additional money coming through the Sustainable Development Fund, the SDF funding, against the challenging backdrop of the ICB finances. So that's something that we're continuing to work through, but we're also in communication with the national and regional team who have oversight on what we're doing. The metrics are there for you to see what we'll need to be reporting on in 24/5, and there's been a couple couple of changes, probably positive really. The first one is that the out of area count used to be on bed days, it's now on actual number of patients, and the other one is in relation to talking therapies, which was measured on access, but now is going to be more focused on outcomes and recovery, which I think is really good to see. We've got a couple of really big priorities in 24-25. The National Inpatient Transformation Programme is a huge programme focusing on all of our inpatients. We're working very closely as a system. There is a number of commissioning guidance documents that have come out, and there's been some finances allocated for this nationally, which we're still working through. We've done an awful lot of work in pulling together all of the systems, so the 6 places and all of the providers that sit in Humber and North Yorkshire, so we know exactly where we have got patients out of area and the type of specialty, because that's really important. So we now have developed a SITREP, a situation report, and what this is telling us, there's really our highest number of people out of area those that require rehabilitation services, and that's right across the system. So we're now looking at what community models, I know Humber's got a really good model, what models we can use for rehab, but also is there any other housing options that we can work at looking at as a system level. So we've just received a number of key lines of inquiry from the national team, 49 in total. So we're working very closely with our provider colleagues, specifically Humber, on that work, and also really closely looking at the finances, because we've got a number of different systems where budgets sit, and we again need to extrapolate this from our continuing healthcare budgets and Section 117. And then the other priority that we wanted to focus on as a collective system is autism. Everybody will be aware of the increase in demands and the autism assessments. So we've recently pulled together a paper that went to the exec last week, just really scoping out the numbers, those numbers weighting, and the different options that we might be able to focus on. The performance against the national long-term trajectories is there in the paper. That's the Q3 position. And I'm really pleased to say that we've now actually met the children and young people access targets. I think that's really good news and testament to all the work that everybody's doing in the providers and the voluntary sector. And then there's just a small piece there about the review work that we've had Carnell Farrell, some external consultants in to review the collaborative and really looking at what the future of the collaborative programme as a whole, with all the providers and the ICB and the place coming together. And they're now doing some option appraisal work for us. And we're at the point of reviewing our strategy, which we discussed briefly last week with the exec. Everyone's really conscious this needs to be co-produced. We're starting with asking our patients what they would want to see in the strategy. So that work is under development. I don't know, Michelle, if you wanted to say anything else about the options appraisal, or if you're happy that kind of we've said enough on that for now.
I think we've said enough on that for now. There's a couple of bits I'm going to pick up later, but I think for now we're just obviously waiting. We're just getting a date now for the final. Well, we hope it'll probably be one of the final workshops. We are working with Carnell Farrell and other mental health provider colleagues in developing those options.
Thank you. So is there any questions for me?
Stuart.
Thanks. Hi, Alison. A question just for you to clarify for me, the relationship between the performance metric, which you talked about, and I think you just said the children and young people's one has now been met, and the work on autism and ADHD assessment pathways. So that the challenge you've got in those pathways, where would I see any performance or adverse performance, by the sound of it, popping up in those metrics? Question number one.
So the autism work has just commenced really, and we're just scoping that across all of our places and providers to see where we've got outliers and the numbers and kind of what is the capacity that we need. So we haven't been routinely managing that as a national performance metric. So it's slightly different. Does that answer your question, Stuart?
So is it across all age groups then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then so secondly, what's the time scale for coming up? You said you'd done some scoping work. Is there a time scale for that piece of work to come up with some things that can be implemented?
Yes, we've already sort of shared some options about different models that could be used, but we're having to feed it into the planning discussions around finances and what finances might be made available. But that has been highlighted as one of our priorities, if you like, across all of our providers and places. But it's tied up with those money discussions, but we're on with kind of getting the best model that we think would be most effective across the system.
Yeah, and in terms of timescale, what timescale are you working for? Recognising the kind of uncertainty about resourcing.
The uncertainty about planning, but I would imagine in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks we will have our next iteration of what it is that we're wanting to do across our providers.
Okay.
Okay, Stuart. Any
Thanks.
other questions? Okay. Thanks very much, Alison. Thank you for your patience today.
Thank you.
Hope you found it interesting.
I did.
Alison.
I did.
See you
Good to hear the
soon.
staff
Take
say
care.
there. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a break and reconvene. Let's reconvene. It's 11:35. Should we come back in about 5 minutes? Can we have it? Is that enough time? Or do people want to go? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, come back 10 minutes. Come back at 1:45, 11:45. There you go. Generous. Thank you. James, if you can stop. Welcome back, everybody, to our board meeting for March, and we'll continue with the agenda, and we're on item 15, the finance report. Pete.
Thanks, Caroline. So this is the finance report as at the end of February, month 11. Obviously, we are approaching the end of the financial year. So I guess I'll take the report as read. If I was to pull out some key highlights ahead of questions, I guess we've included the ICS financial performance there. And, you know, whilst the ICS are reporting a year-to-date variance and currently forecasting a small gap, you know, there's a level of confidence that gap will be managed at year end and the ICS will meet its financial planning target of the 30 million deficit plan. Now, in terms of the trust, at month 11, we delivered a break-even position and we are continuing to forecast a break-even position for the year. You know, we've got the areas of focus in the report we always focus on, which is primary care agency, and obviously the pressures on adult mental health linked to acuity and out of area usage. And our cash position remains strong, as does our better payment practice code, which is always a good indicator of financial health. So I'll take the report as read, stop there, happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Pete. Any questions? Phil?
Yeah, I was really pleased to see that agency had improved, but actually when I had a little look, that consultant spend seemed to be increasing, and is that? I just wondered what that was about, and I just wondered, Pete, whether you could explain to me how you managed a corporate underspend of 2.8 million, and then there was just a statement there. It said items held centrally to offset pressures. I didn't quite understand what it meant.
Yep. So the consultants, we've had an increase in month, but we are looking at the run rate at exec on consultants, factoring in the recent success on recruitment and the international recruitment. And I'm sure Kwame may want to add a little bit further. But in terms of the finance items, Philip, that's obviously, we always plan for the year with a contingency budget, which we release during the year to offset pressures. And obviously we brought some balance sheet flexibility in this year to deliver and manage the financial position. So those two together are the biggest contributors to the corporate underspend.
Right.
Thank you. Kwame?
Yeah, no, Pete is right. So we have done some projection based on the recruitment we've had recently, and the figures will come through. It hasn't come through. We had a recruitment and retention meeting yesterday, and Karen was making the comment that all the things that we've been doing, the figures hasn't come through, and I think they should come through. And our projection for the next financial year is looking really good. So hopefully it will come through. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, that report is noted. We'll move on to the performance report. Pete and Lynn, I think.
Lovely. Thank you, Caroline. So again, this is the report at month 11. I guess, you know, again, I'll pull out a few headlines and we'll go straight to questions. So again, strong performance across majority of the workforce metrics, you know, stat man training in the 90% still, you know, a low vacancy rate continues at 7.1% and strong performance on clinical supervision. I think it's really pleasing to see the continued operational performance on talking therapies being maintained, because we know that's been an area of focus in previous board meetings. And waiting times continues to be an area of focus. You can see in the report some of the work that's been progressed, but obviously, you know, and I'm sure Lynn will come in, some of that will be heavily dependent on the conversations that are taking place during the planning round and kind of reflective of the conversation we had earlier. So I'll stop there. Happy to go to questions unless anybody else wants to add anything.
Hilary?
Yeah, just on the safer staffing dashboard, this is the January data, so right in the height of coughs, colds and respiratory infections, and you can see that in the sickness levels on the units there, which you know, flagging, most of them flagging red, and an increase on the month before. However, all of the quality indicators are more or less being addressed. Clinical supervision is good. Those units that are flagging for clinical supervision not meeting the 85%, all but one, which is STARS, have met it for this month. So STARS has gone up, but again, we'll focus on STARS and see how they're addressing that clinical supervision. So all of the metrics are improving. Nobody's flagging at 5. It's that end column. When it flags at 5, that's a real concern and would show us red on the report. So even in that backdrop of sickness and some vacancies on the unit, and that there's occupied bed days being high on some of the units, we are still achieving our quality indicators. I just wanted to put that context into that dashboard for the board.
Thanks, Hilary. Just out of interest, what's our flu vaccination take up like on those units where we have high levels of sickness?
Wouldn't do it unit by unit, but we can certainly find that
I think
out.
it's just interesting to know, because obviously where it's like schools, isn't it? Where people are in close quarters in contact with each other. It'd be useful to know if there's any correlation there or not, as the case may be.
It's good. It's a good point. Yes, I haven't got it broken down to that, but I know we could get that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Caroline, I'm just going to comment a bit further on the waiting times. It has already been picked up, obviously, but just to give that reassurance that our robust, meticulous analysis of our waiting times continues. Where we are seeing an adverse situation arising, I can certainly confirm that that is related almost in its entirety to those neuro waiting times in children's services and the adult ADHD position. And obviously we are having those conversations ongoing, as Pete's already described, both at ICB level, and it's good to see that through the Mental Health and LD Collaborative, there is now a really robust and vigorous consideration, because obviously we're not the only area in our ICS that has this position around the neurodiversity waiting times, but also at place as well. I know I've got urgent meetings in my diary over the coming couple of weeks with place directors as well around, because obviously we have been raising this continuously. So we are coming to the end, unfortunately, of the additional investment that we put in place. We're not able, Pete's already talked about the financial plan as it stands at the moment, to continue that. Obviously those subcontracted providers are aware of that position at the minute. We're doing our utmost still to maintain the focus on productivity. We don't want to see any of that reduced right up until the end of the month, but it is those areas that are contributing to that deterioration where that exists. Memory assessment waiting times in the 18-week position are contributing a little bit to that overall position as well. Again, we've put very detailed proposals to our commissioners, place folk around what we can do to address that as well. And unfortunately, that probably doesn't require significant investment in comparison to the neuro position. We are having those ongoing conversations about alternate models locally, as you would expect to see. We've developed and finalising a proposal that would see us put more upfront resource into schools. The vast majority of neuro referrals for children come from SENCOs in schools, and we know that we can do more if we either translate resource or put some additional resource, but all of that unfortunately is funding dependent. So those conversations are ongoing for the reasons that we've already discussed. I think it is acknowledged clearly we need a different approach around these services. It'd be good to see where the ICB bit gets us to as well, but obviously we are having that local conversation, because Hull, in terms of demand, I think across our ICS is an outlier. So it may well be that we need to do something, aligned to what's emerging nationally around these models, but different in Hull as well. And those conversations are taking place.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Phil, and then I've got Stuart.
Thanks, Lynn, for some of those inputs. That's really helpful. I was gratified to read that despite 20% more children and young people accessing our services over the last couple of years, that actually there are no CAMHS waiting times of over a year now. So I think that's something, and I know it's a long time, but it's a sign of progress. Just a couple of areas that I just wondered what's happening. Memory diagnoses waits seem to have increased for the last 10 months, and sometimes I just feel with memory diagnosis that just needs to be modernised, how it goes about people getting a diagnosis. There's still a sense that GPs are not allowed to make the diagnosis, which is bizarre, particularly in the more obvious end of the spectrum. And I just wonder if you could just say a little bit about out-of-hour placements, which are increasing, and they're mainly PICU. So I just wondered what that was about specifically. Thank you.
Yeah, on the first point around memory assessment, Philip, obviously we work really closely with primary care and place colleagues around that. So we're constantly revising the model. So of course, patients can be diagnosed where that's applicable in primary care. However, there still is an increased demand position that's underlying that pressure around waiting times. And again, all of our information evidence support that. We've shared that into our local systems. They're very well aware of that as well. If I'm honest as well, a diagnosis is one aspect, isn't it, Philip? But it's the support that matters post-diagnosis or even pre-diagnosis. And unfortunately, what we are seeing as well, because of the pressures on local authorities, some reduction in those support services at the same while as rising demand, given the age profile of the population. So I'm confident that we've got the absolute understanding and grip of where we need to go. In fact, what we need to do to resolve that as well. But it is part of those ongoing conversations around the planning process at the moment. We're absolutely assured, and we keep on repeating our work, Philip, to ensure that our service is productive, is efficient, and is delivering as much capacity as it possibly can. And I can certainly assure the board that it is doing that. On the PICU position, so we have seen an increased demand, Philip, for PICU beds lately as well. We have assessed all of that, and you'll have heard that Alison also made reference to some ICB-wide work around that. That is reflective of that sort of acuity position around mental health demand. We're not the only place that's seeing that rise at the moment as well. You'll know as well that our PIC unit has both male and female beds. And what we've seen latterly is an increased demand for female beds, interestingly, and the patient mix in the unit. Our PICU unit has been, it's been fully occupied. We're using all the beds to support that. And obviously we remain in close contact with those patients when they are out of area. Ideally, we would repatriate them, ideally actually not to a PICU bed when we can actually transfer to an open ward. Sorry, excuse me. Obviously catching today. So I think we're doing absolutely everything we can to mitigate that situation around PICU as best as we're able to.
Okay, thank you very much. On the memory clinic, it just sort of triggered with me that I did do a visit to our memory clinic not so long ago, and Kirsty, I think clinical team leader there, and one of the things that they raised with me when we were talking about waiting times and people missing appointments and what have you was particularly amongst a younger age group of people who got referred to them sometimes from GPs when actually it wasn't necessarily dementia as an issue. And age related in that sense, and therefore there was something I think that she was explaining to me as a layperson about at that front end, Phil, at GPs actually being able to say this isn't, you've got to send it to the right referral to the right place. But there was certainly something about when I asked about who were the largest group of people who didn't turn up her appointment, from what I recall, she said it was mainly that younger age group for which there is something going on in terms of their memory, but it's not the sort of older presented diagnosis that we are usually more familiar with. And I just thought that was again interesting, and it links to your point.
I recognise that cohort. It's the part of the problem is that often the presentation is made quite forcibly.
Yeah.
And as a GP, that you've got very little outlets, and to actually say no, there's nothing wrong with your memory is quite a difficult statement for some GPs, and I think that's the issue. But then they get inappropriately referred into the memory clinic. But I do recognise that cohort.
Yeah. And I think patients know it's not that, and then they're not turning up because they don't feel that satisfies what they think is happening to them. And Lynn's nodding there, so I hopefully have reflected Kirsty and our team's views on that today. Thanks. Okay, Stuart. Sorry, Lynn.
Just come back on that point as well, Caroline, because obviously what we do have is the primary mental health workers attached to primary care and GPs. Kwame has also been leading a programme of work around quick access for GPs to consultation and advice from our staff as well, particularly psychiatrists where it's appropriate. So through those routes, we should be in a position to continue to work on that issue. Caroline, so it's no, it's not in the patient's best interest to be referred and then to be told, actually, you've not come to the right place. We need to put the support in early to, direct those to the right place. Agree with Philip. It is an emerging cohort at the moment. We are seeing that in our data, but I think through those mechanisms, we should be able to have a positive impact on that, both for the referrer and for the patient.
Thanks, Lynn. Stuart.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Lynn, this is another one for you. It's on those waiting time graphs, and I'm looking specifically at it's PAC page 219, and it's the number of patients waiting 52 weeks or more for assessment and diagnosis on adult ADHD. I think I heard you say in your earlier explanation that in relation to children, you're seeing referrals coming from SENCOs in schools. Have you got any insight into that line, which is going just simply inexorably up, isn't it? Is it partly people feeding through as they turn 18?
Yes, it is, Stuart. That's part of the issue. In fact, we've had a good close look at that cohort. And actually that cohort, we've actually got a slightly different pathway for. So we're actually fairly comfortable that we can manage that. But what we're seeing, obviously, is unfortunately is that explosion in the rest of the adult population of demand. And I've brought figures to the board before, haven't I, in terms of what that's looking like. But it's still rising. It's not plateaued yet either. So that is, and it was prior to COVID, a service that we had very little commissioned capacity and resource. In fact, it was on a cost per case basis prior to COVID. It's been picked up in the block now, but the resource that basically it's about 3 staff for the Stuart, that we started off with, but now it's just been an exponential rise in demand. So we are setting that out too. And I think, again, it's that sort of wider context that we've talked about before. I think, Caroline, you shared some insights from your perspective. That so on the one hand, it's great, isn't it? We're seeing that sort of acknowledgement of neurodiversity in our wider population. But what we can't continue with is diagnosis being the only route to support. So for me, it's really about that model and position, and I think we've talked about it before. The neurodivergent, element of our population is what we should expect.
And I raise it again. Because I think it's a really good, for me. Well, as a layperson, it's a very good case study of the need to really understand a problem that's clearly got a solution in a number of different players across the state and community sector. And I wondered to what extent you're confident that you can actually get to a kind of a common understanding of what needs doing, even though the barrier might be, look, this is a question of resourcing or skills or money, which we don't have right now. And so then we have to take, as a country or a region, we take on the chin, this problem is just going to get worse. Do you think we're getting to that kind of conclusion or another conclusion?
I think we're slowly but surely, Stuart, getting on. Notice that Michelle's got a hand up as well to that conclusion. But it's managing, isn't it, that public expectation as well around this. I think it's going to take a while to make a systemic change around that. I think the good thing is we now are having those conversations with our partners around that position. But it's how we get from where we are now to that position where we've got a very changed national approach around this particular issue. But I think that the reality is in a better place than it was, say, 12 months ago, but we've still got a long way to go.
Michelle?
Yeah, it's a really good conversation. It's a really good question, actually. I think there's 2 facets to it. I think one is what we can do in our organisation with the resources that we have, and to ensure that we're really productive and we have that productivity in relationship to our systems and processes. And I agree with what's been said about the diagnosis then becomes a bit of an issue. It's a bit like dementia. We can meet the dementia diagnosis target, but then the access to services and support afterwards is a bit more difficult. But we're working with our local authority colleagues, and it's not just the local authority in both of those aspects. There is that service user patient expectation. I think there's also this need for a label as well at the moment to access other services and be a gateway into other services as well that we need to be mindful of. So I think we need to do our own bit from an ops point of view. Are we, as I said, are we productive? Is it good? Is it a quality outcome, etc.? But then there's a bigger piece of work that I'm helping with and supporting, not just from our ICB point of view, but nationally, about what do we do nationally, because it's a national issue. And I think that I think it should be one of the things I'd like to see going into manifestos going forward, because I think there is such an issue around why people have to have, you know, go through gateways to get access to services. There must be a more streamlined service that will then free up the services to be able to deal with the people that they've got, if that makes sense. So we're dealing with it locally and we're dealing with it regionally and nationally.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And you can point to any number of equivalent kind of problems, if you like, in other sectors. And I think our job to communicate to people, when I say people, the public voters, about the kind of the trade-offs and the constraints is really important. So thank you for that. And I agree that kind of working at multiple levels is the right answer.
Yeah, thank you. Again, just to reflect back some comments from some of the teams, because it's pertinent to this conversation. I recently sort of had a visit with the CAMS team, but also the neurodiversity team for children and young people as well. And I hear what you're saying about the SENCOs in schools, Lynn. I think sort of what I was hearing from the team that, you know, obviously we've discussed this before, that when everybody in the partnership signed up to the front door, I think what became apparent was actually our partners, with the best, you know, possible will to them on this, I think signed up, and this was what I was getting from our staff, without knowing about how practically they were meant to contribute to this before making referrals. And that's to a certain extent where it's fallen down. And I think there's a real lesson there, I felt, and so did the staff, about what does partnership really mean, especially when you're trying to, you know, execute a process, a gateway for, you know, people to come through. If not all parts of that are actually working, there might be very good reasons for that. We ended up with what we ended up with that summer, didn't we, when we had to literally, for a short space of time, shut the door to deal with it. And there's some ramifications that way. And I think, again, you know this, Lynn, you know, it's about also those in the schools, not just the SENCO, just having a little bit of awareness that actually there's a number of issues could be at play here before they think about just going down one particular route. And your point, Michelle, on the streamline, the other thing that's come back from staff as well is that, you know, as we've seen this when you've answered questions on this before, Lynn, you know, we're often finding, aren't we, that at the end of the assessment, it isn't what the person or their family thought was the outcome. So I don't know, you know, should we be having a more general assessment before we drive into that specialism to sort of try and sort these things at the front? That's certainly something that's come up from staff, particularly in relation to learning disabilities, whether there's some sort of dual assessment on that. Now, I'm not a clinician. You and your colleagues are all the professional people in that space, but there's some really sort of practical things that have come back from staff on this. And the only other thing I'd like to make, which is just out the national as well, and about affecting our waiting lists, is I think there is, you know, a lot of discussion about why we've had this massive uptick in the number of children and young people presenting in terms of mental health need. And it's, you know, it's important that actually we recognise some of that is because they're feeling more confident to come forward. But there's quite a lot of discussion about this was happening before the pandemic. And actually, I think some issues around mobile phones, and a number of reports now saying that actually smartphones in particular, which came in the sort of, you know, what was it, 2013, 2014, something like that, you know, there's a correlation between that and the amount of time children and young people are spending on this, and also what they're accessing that's influencing them. And I just wonder if as a trust, we're engaged in some of that discussion as well, because a number of schools, and maybe this is something to take away with our partners, are now going for a mobile-free school. So that is not something that is happening. So actually children and young people have some space where this is not anti-technology, by the way, but they have some space where that is not distracting them or distracting others. And maybe there's a wider discussion to have around some of those issues as well, with our partners too, about how, and working with parents on this. A lot of parent groups are now saying, actually, we need to protect our children from some of these devices and the downsides of it, as well as recognising there's some positives as well. Okay, that's all right. That's my rant. Okay. Right, okay, thank you very much for that. Let's move on, and we have the closed culture progress report.
Thank you, Caroline. This report is about number 4 now, I think, since Edenfield in October 22. So for those that weren't on the board when Edenfield Panorama programme was aired, we did bring a report to the board showing all the governance that we have in place that would identify closed culture and all the work that we were doing. So the 4 reports since then have just been building and building and building on that. I actually think looking at this now, I think it's almost like it's almost beyond closed cultures for us. It's more now about how we're supporting the development of the cultures that are aligned to trust values. I think the report's sort of becoming more of that, really. And obviously, avoidance of closed cultures are in there. So I hope from looking at the board of seeing that this is very high priority for our staff. You can see from the authors, all the divisions have contributed to it, and corporate services as well. It's a continuous focus. It is very high profile. It manifests in a lot of discussions, doesn't it, Lynn, that we have with divisions, and certainly on our visits as well as we're going out. The closed cultures awareness sessions that we started with our newly registered staff have been really well evaluated. It went from half a day to a full day. There is so much in there now, and we're going to start rolling them out for all staff, all teams, to be able to go to those sessions as well. So that's a real positive from that. I've put some of the staff survey that aligns to closed cultures in the report on section 2.9. Again, really positive. Always more we can do, but we benchmark incredibly well above national and our benchmark group. I think we're just the same on manager listening with our benchmark group. A lot in there. I'm not going to go through it in detail. Everybody's had the opportunity to read it, so I'm just happy to take any questions or any queries on any of the information that's in the report.
Thanks, Hilary, and thanks to all your team and everyone else who've been working on this for since Edenfield. And I think there's some really good progress and really good new ways of working or addressing and looking at some of these issues which we've embedded in now. That's great. Any hands up? Did I see a hand go up and go down? No, yeah, Phil, there you go. Yeah, just really quickly, I thought it was a really good report. We're getting good assurance in quality committee, but just to highlight that perhaps one area that we perhaps need to have a little bit of focus on is about how we ensure that carers and families members are heard. I think that's just maybe one area that at some point we need to just spend a little bit of time understanding that and getting assurance and seeing whether we need to do a little bit more. Thank you, Phil, for that. Stuart?
Yeah, Hilary, very, very useful analysis once again. And I've made this point before, but it's such an important element of our culture, isn't it? Speaking up and speaking openly. And I can't but conclude that there's a link between the approach that's being taken here and the approach we see that gives results in the staff survey about a group of people, here on this call and beyond in the organisation, who are confident about sharing concerns and sharing celebrations. I think that's those two for me tie up quite nicely in today's conversation.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Okay, so thank you for that. And Hilary, can you take away Phil's point around the carers and family side of it as well? Brilliant.
Yeah, will do. It's good.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Moving on then to item 18. This is my report on the subcommittee chairs and non-executive director champions. It's just a note, but basically I feel that we're going to keep the present arrangements as they are. And of course, we've got a recruitment round for 2 NEDs who will be replacing Francis and Mike later this year. And so therefore we plan to finish in July. I'll have another review then about what we will do going forward. But basically it's status quo for the time being. And I just put a note in as well about the Charitable Funds Committee. Pete's looking at that for us to come back as that work comes into the organisation to be run. We need a new vehicle for assurance, I think, to deal with that. So that's a piece of work that's in progress. So any questions? No, everyone happy? Great. Let's move on then. Francis. No, sorry.
It's me.
Phil.
It's me.
Phil.
You confused me then, Caroline.
No, I know. Sorry, they put FP, and I just looked at it and then thought, no, that's not right. Phil.
No. I did notice that and pointed it out, but we've already got our papers, haven't we? Yeah, we had the assurance committee, the quality committee board is there, assurance reports there to read. We had a good meeting, an important presentation on sexual safety, which overall was assuring, which is one of two areas that we felt that needed focus on. We received the mental health inpatient design pre-consultation business case and had a good look at that, and we're going to keep that current, present, ready for when we can find a route to capital and to take it further as needed. So we shall look forward with bated breath how that progresses. We noted the increase in number of contracts for prison care, and we were looking for some assurance that those services are safe. Inherently feel a bit anxious about prison care, perhaps maybe just from past knowledge, and just didn't quite understand fully the partnership with CHUV, and so we were looking for a little bit more to learn a bit more about that in the first place. But we're taking on 2 new prisons shortly. We've already talked quite a bit about the CQC reports at Humber Primary Care and Market Wheaton, and also just wanted the board to be clear that we received a report on triage services as requested. So we've sort of had a good look at that, and there's some points that have been raised today, particularly about access to primary care, and we'll pick those up with our ongoing scrutiny of the general practice. And that was it. I didn't know whether there were any questions on any of those issues.
Thank you, and yeah, and really comprehensive front sheet as well. Thanks for that, Phil. Any questions? No, thank you very much. And as you said, a number of the items you've been looking at, we've picked up in today and other parts of the agenda. So that connection is really good to see. OK, thank you. Moving on then to Mike.
Thank you. This is the assurance report for the 1st of February. An enormous amount of positive assurance here. Some of it quite unexpected in some ways, like the section 4s, which is the emergency use section to detain someone with only one doctor, nil use for the last 11 months, increasing the network of people with lived experience. That's fantastic news in terms of patient care. And the consent to treatment, 2 junior doctors taking on the audit, and we've had issues there just in terms of record keeping. But there's good news with the 2 junior hospital doctors is not only will they do the work and the heavy lifting, but also that sort of promotes ownership amongst that community as to the importance of record keeping. So that's great stuff and a very, very positive meeting. But sort of on the downside a little bit was delayed transfers of care from secure services, but Mental Health Legislation Committee is receiving regular updates, and at the last board meeting Lynn Parkinson gave us a good rendition of how it's a national problem but how we're doing everything possible. And in the light of Edenfield, what Mental Health Legislation Committee has been doing is having a real focus on these patient care issues, and we now get summaries, not patient identifiable, of everyone in long-term segregation, care away from others. So I really think we are cracking on, because on this agenda, if we're not running forward, we're standing still, we're going backwards, if you see what I mean. So really, really positive meeting, and I look forward to chairing my last meeting in the future. Thank you.
Oh. Thank you, Mike, for that. Yeah, there's really some really good assurances within this report. Thank you. Any questions? And Lynn's just put in the chat box something there. Let me have a look. Oh yeah, okay. Delays from secure bases reduced further. We currently have a one delay. Brilliant. Thank you for that topical update, Lynn.
Yeah, excellent.
On the record as well for this meeting. Thank you. OK, moving on then to Stuart, Audit Committee.
Yeah, thanks very much. So once again a quite busy but generally positive audit committee last time we met in February. Going to bring out a couple of things about good work on the implementation of the new provider selection regime, which will lead to a change in some of the reporting we do. There's continues to be active consideration of the way the risk management system works. Children and LD division came and explained to us how they're doing things, and I'm following up a couple of things in relation to that along the way. We're likely to see some new risks appearing at the trust-wide register over time relating to estates, financial stability and digitalisation, which the EMT have been discussing. I know that'll come through. The internal audit programme continues to be very positive in its feedback, with a really strong track record on implementing audit recommendations. So another good external recognition of the fact that we as an organisation take those kind of things seriously, which is very good. There's just a couple of things that we were concerned about in one of the recent audit reports to do with service users' money at Westlands, but there's the management response was very, very quick and firm for that, which was good to hear. And we approved the plans for internal audit for next year, which is always a good position to be in. So all good on the internal audit front. And once again, thanks to everyone across the organisation who continues to keep our control environment effective.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Any questions? No? Okay. Charitable Funds Assurance Report.
Yeah, so that's me again. So very briefly then, we know that we're in transition. You indicated, Caroline, we're just having a review about the sort of the future of this committee. In any case, we're soon coming to the end of the agreement with our current fundraising partner, and we're going to have an in-house arrangement from the end of from early April. And we've identified 3 campaigns with some fundraising efforts still continuing, not going too badly, but obviously we're looking for an increase in performance from the in-house arrangements in the future.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Nope. Okay. And it's you again, Stuart.
It is, yeah.
You're
so
on a roll. Collaborative committee.
This completes my trio. So this is the collaborative committee assurance report. Again, positive things to hear at this last meeting, both in terms of what we're doing locally and in terms of our continued contribution into the kind of the national learning on how these collaboratives work. At the local level, I'm going to pick out a couple of kind of really interesting innovations. The EDIT team, Eating Disorders team, which was kind of working from January, has already prevented 3 admissions into CAMHS patients admissions by providing intensive home support. So that was for me a really good example of, continuing to look for innovation in service delivery. As very welcome. And in fact, most of the concerns in this meeting were about resourcing. We looked at the impact rather of some enhanced packages of cares which weren't previously budgeted for, and generally the risks that we're looking at the moment and monitoring are predominantly financial. So again, a positive report from this committee, and more to look forward to.
Great, thanks very much, Stuart. And it was great to attend my first collaborative committee not so long ago. I was really, obviously seeing all the reports come out. It was really good to hear the actual discussion that was going on, and just the level actually of strategic sort of oversight that was happening as well within that committee as well. Obviously the operational side too. So that was good to hear and see for myself. So thank you for that, those assurance reports. April Board Strategic Development Agenda, you've got a sort of outline here. The idea is for this one that we were going to have a focus on digital. So particularly, and we've been having a discussion about what we want, and part of it is about something where we can have a sense of what's the transformative impact of this. And I think Michelle and others, Pete, are looking to have actually an external trust come and talk about their experience in that respect. But if there are particularly on any NEDs, any thoughts about those items, I think we've already talked earlier on today about trying to find some space to look at the operational plan as well. But the idea is the main, so I'll take that away. But the idea for the day is to focus on the digital. So if you want to send me any thoughts, having looked at this agenda, about what you want to hear from those parts of the agenda, or if there's something missing, please let me know ASAP. That would be really helpful. Any questions? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. I haven't got any items to escalate. I haven't been given notice for any other business. Any other business? No. Review of the meeting, being Humber. Any thoughts of that? I thought it was actually a really engaging meeting today. Lots of discussion, lots of questions, and very thoughtful. I hope you found, you know, the papers also all accessible as well, and the discussion of a good quality. Any comments from anybody? Happy with that? Okay, thumbs up from Mike. Thank you. I'll take that as read then in that case. Thank you, Mike. All right then. Okay, thank you. That's the end of our public board meeting, and therefore we will close and reconvene for part 2. It is 12:26. Let's have half an hour till 1. Okay, and we'll reconvene for part 2. Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. See you at 1.